The elderly doctor flipped through the medical records once more and placed them on the table. Still, Martha Robertson, I don't quite understand your choice. You are handing me a patient with a very complex diagnosis as an experienced physician. You can't help but realize that there are no minutiae in this case. Everything from physical characteristics to, going to the bathroom. And here I only have the results of the tests. I did not lead this man, John Smith. I realize you have a difficult task, of course. The chief medical officer kept adjusting the stationery or the keyboard on her desk. But you have accumulated a tremendous amount of experience. You are a recognized authority, one might say, convinced by a gray-bearded man. The doctor waited quietly for her to finish speaking, though he had generally already guessed the finality of her speech. 49 years of experience does not go to waste. But you must also realize, now Martha began to rub her wedding ring with such force that it was frightening to watch. It looked like she was about to tear her finger off. Yes, you must understand, Alex Johnson is one of our far-from-recent clients, and thus, she lowered her voice to a mysterious whisper, he's on our special account. You mean he spares no expense? The doctor innocently inquired. The blush that instantly broke out on the supervisor's cheeks was more eloquent than any answer. He values quality, service, and professionalism. He's helped us several times with the purchase of expensive equipment. And besides, I understand now you want me to be the one to inform your important client that his days are numbered. John Smith spoke slowly, glancing at the medical records in front of him. But why? After all, he was being managed by another doctor, Hawkins. And to be precise, Hawkins had an accident this morning, she informed him dryly. He's in intensive care at the moment, and no one can say yet if he'll recover. Her voice grew stronger as if she'd finally found a good reason, and decided to insist. You'll have to take over his duties temporarily, knowing that you already have a lot of work to do. But what can I do? And in a day or two, I'll think of something to relieve you. Go on, John Smith. There's no time to waste. Well, I'll try. As soon as the office door closed behind him, Martha Robertson dialed someone's number. He'll do it right, she said dryly. I don't think there will be any complications. All right, one last shot, and then it's off to discharge. The pretty nurse smiled. Alex Johnson couldn't resist a little temptation to glance at the girl's figure. But how good were her endless legs and such appetizing forms that even a closed suit could not hide their charms. The only trouble was that this doll's hands were heavy, and she did not know how to stab painlessly. She'll learn, maybe, he thought. In the old days, he would certainly have stabbed after her, he said. The girl grimaced slightly in pain as she pulled out the needle and pressed the injection site with absorbent cotton. Why aren't you the same now as you used to be? She asked, lowering her eyes modestly. Her eyelashes were long, thick. A beauty. Except she'd better keep her pretty mouth shut now. Consider me gone, he replied thoughtfully. The pretty mouth instantly took the shape of an O. Alex Johnson preferred not to be interested in what she had to say. While the procedure was going on, he lightly pinched her cheek and left the office. He'd had enough for today. Beauty overdoses are dangerous. The doctor's office was cool, and the quiet whirring of the air conditioner could be heard. John Smith, the embodiment of wisdom, looking both like Doc Abe and Santa Claus, remained gravely silent, nodding his pen at the discharge form. He had lived a long time and had seen a lot. The joyful amazement of those who were ready to die but suddenly recovered. People, on learning of the death of a hopelessly ill person, suddenly burst into desperate weeping, and the tears were not caused by grief, but by relief and guilt. He saw those who feared death and those who feared life. These were the most difficult patients in his practice. He was used to judging no one because he knew well what life was all about. And there was only one thing he still found difficult. Only one thing, and that it can't be cured or slowed down in any way. Alex Johnson repeated his question. Look, I'm not stupid. And then, I pay you so much that I can count on direct answers. The doctor replied with a heavy sigh. You're not paying me, you're paying the clinic. But of course, that's just a matter of opinion. You see, I'm not God Almighty, and accurate predictions cannot give. You must understand that. Cases vary. No, I'm not asking, the man said impatiently. You are not like God, but like a doctor. Tell me what can be done. But we could use supportive care. Actually, you'd be better off talking to your doctor. but I'm told he's in trouble. And I don't know you well enough. We're not on a date with a stranger. You have my chart with my labs, my what's-his-name. That's right, the doctor nodded. But you're overlooking something, the capabilities of the body. They are, individual. I can give you, say, only an average prognosis. So give it to me in the end and we'll part in peace. Well, what do we do? The surgery's too risky. You're not a young man. But therapy, I get that. And this therapy of yours will help? The doctor looked up at him with clear, expressionless eyes. No, it won't help death, but it can postpone the end. So for how long? A year and a half, maybe 2. But that sounds like a general prognosis to me. You'll need a strict dietary regimen, daily medications. Physical activity will have to be eliminated. Without it, if I refuse treatment, give me your overall prognosis. If you can hurry, it's freezing in your office. I'm already freezing without therapy. You will live no more than 3 months. The doctor answered briefly and precisely, like a scalpel cut of a martial arts master. Anasy Mikhailovich rose from his chair easily, without any apparent effort, though his muscles shrieked with pain and the white walls swayed for a moment before his eyes. But that did not matter. What mattered was something else entirely, to hold himself proud, and if a man fears nothing, or rather, no one should see that a man is afraid. Thank you. All the best to you, he said and headed for the door, but at the door the doctor called out to him. No, wait. He stopped, but did not turn around. There was no more strength left to look like an invincible warrior. Better save it. Do you believe in anything? The doctor asked. In God and goodness. Do you? He made him turn around. And why do you ask that? Litter did not look away. Those who believe in something find it easier to walk away. And if you believe, don't stop believing. And if you don't, try to believe. Try. Van grinned. I suppose I have plenty of time to think about it. He walked out. Roman Sergeyevich, left alone in his office, shifted a stack of papers and began to sort them out, transfer them. How many cases like this had he handed over, and he still couldn't get used to it, and will never get used to it? Perhaps it's good. As long as your soul aches for each patient, you do everything to save, pull out, scratch him from death, as long as your soul hurts. But how much does it hurt? Anasy Mikhailovich did not allow himself to waste time, and deep down he despised those who did not realize the value of every minute lived. As the song goes, moments whistle like bullets at the temple. If you are used to work, converting each moment into a monetary unit, you will eventually get your fortune. And on top of it, professional deformation, which will turn you into a person for whom a normal human vacation will become something like a mindless waste of money. Yes, that's the most accurate way to put it. Afanasy Mikhailovich could not stand such wastefulness, and he sincerely did not understand how one could allow oneself to sleep until dinner time, or, for example, to wander idly about the streets. But that had been before in a previous life, and in this one, which promised to be quite short, he wandered aimlessly through the streets, looking at billboards, catching his reflection in shop windows. Judging by some of the women's looks, he was still quite attractive. Well, that was bread. He tried to imagine what he'd be like in a couple months. Probably by then he'd be skin and bones, his face wrinkled, his eyes red and watery, and there was no telling if he'd be able to walk to the restroom on his own. He wrinkled his nose, pushing that colorful picture away. There was no point in burying himself prematurely, and then 2 or 3 months was still a long way off. Not so long ago, the days were changing so quickly on a page in his grandmother's calendar, which hung in the kitchen. It was a thick notebook, and every morning Grandma would tear off the page, first thing, opening a new day. And on the back of each page was some wisdom, then a poem by a famous poet, then a recipe for some pie with pumpkin and zucchini, then instructions on how to build a birdhouse. Alex Johnson even grinned, remembering that calendar. How similar to life. The day passed and brought you something new. The main thing is not to yawn, not to miss it. Hey, it's a shame. They don't have calendars like that now. Or do they still have them? He'd buy one. I wonder where they sell them. Alex Johnson walked slowly down the street, looking for the name of some store selling such goods. He urgently needed a tear-off calendar. He was so engrossed in his search that he almost tripped over a woman in her 30s sitting on the pavement. It was hard to determine her age. Her face was too tired. It always makes you look older than you really are. Can't you see there are people walking around? He snapped habitually, but immediately faltered. There's nothing to perform here, Baron. The past life is over, and in this one behave like a man. Lightridge. The woman, however, did not react in any way to his rudeness. Only moved aside, without saying a word. I'm sorry, he squatted down beside her. Didn't notice. I was looking for a place. Sorry, she looked at him timidly, apparently not used to being apologized to. It was my own fault, she said quietly. I sat down. It made me dizzy. I thought I was going to fall. Damn it, Alex Johnson mentally cried. He felt unbearably ashamed of himself. The man felt bad, and he hadn't noticed. But now he could clearly see both the unnaturally pale from his face and the fine trembling in his hands. Drinking? He asked. No, only hungry. 3 days hungry. He nodded. That's understandable, I guess. Give me your hand then. That's it. There's a cafe 2 steps away. Let's go there. She, staggering, stood in front of him. Tall, blonde, and probably beautiful. If she could be fed and tidied up a bit. I don't have any money, she admitted. He waved it away. But I have some. Let's go. The waiter came to their table, and seeing the represented man, bowed his head. His companion got only a skeptical chuckle at the corner of her mouth. Alex Johnson noticed it and instantly became angry. The footman slapped. Snobbery had always been his weak point, ever since he was young, when he had seen sales clerks bowing to wealthy customers, while ordinary people were almost shunned. He himself, by the way, had been a simple man in those days, so he could well imagine how this ungroomed woman felt with a smirk meant for others. Hold still, or you won't get a tip. Now make a note for the lady to have freshly squeezed carrot juice. Dilute with water in a 50-50 proportion. Memorize that for yourself too, and then a fruit plate. Me a glass of red wine and a cheese platter. Baby can't fulfill and remember the tip. The waiter rushed into the kitchen. He was probably very offended, but tried not to show it in any way. Although, look, Alex Johnson remarked philosophically, his ears flaming with expression. She looked at the departing waiter and smiled sadly. Thank you for standing up for me. You shouldn't have, though. Why did she shrug? He's been running back and forth with a tray all day. He wants to feel like a human being. With people like you can't go without a tip. So he takes it out on the weaker ones. That? The man asked sharply. The poorer, the weaker, the less fortunate, I guess, yes. That's a separate offense, he said. You should not deprive him of tips, but in general not worry about the donkey. He got off easy. So the waiter would get it this time, he said, fixing an absent expression on his face. Bon appetit, he began to tear up the bill. Hillbilly, he said and left. Well, shall we get acquainted? My name's Alex Johnson. And you are? Me, I'm Martha. Alex Johnson. Yeah. What were you looking for when you were walking down the street? They said there was some place they couldn't find. I was looking for a gift store, he smiled. For some reason I remembered my grandmother's tear-off calendar with advice for each day. I wanted to find a similar one. Do you know if there's a store like that around here? Well, I don't know about a store, Martha said. But about the calendar. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a calendar. Take it. Miracles. Alex Johnson muttered. How? From where? It's exactly as it should be, only the dates are different. He carefully flipped through the thin pages. Yes, it's the same. And the poems, and the advice. Where did you get it? Martha sipped her orange juice slowly. Alex Johnson noticed that her pale cheeks were slightly flushed. It's a calendar, she said. My inheritance. Not much, though. The man grinned. It's just that I was taking care of a grandmother. She didn't have enough money to pay me properly, but she gave me and my son enough to eat. Plus, she let us live in the same apartment. Grandma was single. She promised that she would leave the apartment to us, but after she died, suddenly some relatives appeared who had never been seen before. They had all the rights, of course, so my son and I were kicked out the doors. Here's a calendar. Grandma liked to flip through it. As you can see, the pages are almost wiped clean. She read it like a book. I don't know why, but I kept it. I figured it was the kind of inheritance I deserved. That's the story. Alex Johnson put the calendar on the table. No, look, Martha, if it's that important to you. I don't? No, take it. I gave it to you, he asked after a while. Where's your son? And in general, how did it happen that you started living with a stranger? My son is in an orphanage, Martha replied. After that story with Grandma, I went to church. A priest I knew there took her to confess to me several times. I went there and told him everything. I said, this is the way it can be. Will my boy stay at the orphanage with you until I find something? He agreed, but not for long, of course. But the child will be fed there. I'll figure something out. It won't be like this forever. I was on my way to him when I felt sick. I almost made it. And I'm feeling good now. Thank you. Thank you for what? A glass of juice and fruit. Isn't that enough? That juice and fruit literally brought me back to life. And you say there's nothing to be thankful for. She smiled. By the way, don't you need a housekeeper, for example? Or if you have a garden, I can help. No, he answered. Unless I need a nurse. But that's in 2 or 3 months. Your parents, your husband, if there was one. What, all alone? I'm probably asking too much, though. Martha shrugged. No, why is it unnecessary? My mother left me and my father. I don't even remember her. I was maybe 1.5 years old. And then he remarried. He gave me to my grandparents, and he and his wife went to Irving and then somewhere overseas. Grandpa died. My grandmother and I lived alone. Then our house burned down. They put us in the local government building for a while. We lived there for a week, and then my grandmother left at night. I was 17. Spring. I waited until I finished school and got a job in the city as a nurse in a hospital to have some money. That's where I met my husband. And what, did you ask? Did he leave you? No, I left him. I found out some things about him. So I left. I just took the baby and left. I think he was kind of relieved. Well, I see. All with you. Alex Johnson could hardly hold back a smile. What can I take from them? They're always making a big deal out of everything. Look, Martha, I've been around a long time, so I'm telling you this as a father. In married life, sometimes you got to be able to turn a blind eye. You find out something. Maybe you read a message on your phone. You see it and forget it. It's most often as trivial as you describe. So you figured I found out he was walking, and that's why I ran away. Her blue eyes opened wide. I'd rather he was, honestly. But then what? Nothing, Martha said. She added with a momentary gloom. And anyway, thank you for everything. I'll be going. My son is probably waiting for me. He didn't have time to stop her. Martha disappeared instantly, as if vanished into thin air. Somehow he thought she seemed offended or frightened. It was evening darkness. The waiter was looming nearby and pointed his ears meaningfully, probably counting on a long-awaited tip. Alex Johnson left a bill for him under the glass. It was time to go anyway. Not that he wanted to go home, but he couldn't stay here forever. Even if your own personal eternity didn't stretch very far. At night, already lying in bed and flipping through a beggar's calendar, Alex Johnson suddenly became angry. Why did he need all these trinkets? Tear off the sheets, counting down the days to die in time. What the hell is that? What the hell is wrong with him? No, he was promised death. That's a fact, but no one said he'd go crazy. And he seems to have lost his mind a little bit. Suddenly, the calendar began to scare him, like going to the end of the clock. He got out of bed, took the battery out of the wall clock. There you go, 0000. Perfect time. And the calendar? We should just give it back to this Martha. I mean, we still have to find her, but I think she said she had a son in a church foster home, and I think she was on her way to see him. Alex Johnson knew which church was near where they met. How could he not? He'd made a couple of big donations in his time, and he had his own reasons which he preferred not to talk about, and now he had to go there. He arrived at the church in the morning and waited patiently for the service to end. The priest passed by. Either not recognizing him or not noticing him, Alex Johnson caught him by the sleeve. Wait, Father Ethan. He stopped and immediately recognized the benefactor who had not appeared here for a long time. Good morning, Alex. Were you at the service? Waiting for it to end. I'm on another little man's case. Can you help me? There's a boy in your foster home. I don't think he's more than 10 or 12 years old. He came here recently and temporarily. Father Ethan nods. There's such a boy, Kyle, his mother in W1 Dent. She's the one I'm interested in. interrupted Alex Johnson. She's a tall blonde, looks about 30 years old, and her name is Martha. Do you know her? I need to see her. Of course, she visits her son every day. She should be here by 5:00. That's not soon enough, of course, but perhaps you would like to... No, he interrupted the priest again. I don't want to pray, if that's what you mean. I want to talk to you. It is possible. Father Ethan smiled complacently. Yes, if I understand correctly, we are not talking about confession, but just an ordinary conversation between a layman and a priest. Well then, let's take a walk. There's a lot of people in the church. The park is quiet now. Alex Johnson grinned. Is that so we won't be overheard? The priest shrugged his shoulders. If you will, people like you don't come to talk about the fact that you accidentally had a fight and now they're racked with conscience. That's not what you're worried about, is it? You're perceptive. I hope so. Besides, Father Ethan winked. The weather's too nice. Today they walked leisurely through an alley planted with tall, old trees, but only more beautiful because of it. It feels good, Alex Johnson sighed. Green, fresh, his father singing. The priest shook his head. You're here for something, aren't you? Yes. Well, to see Martha, of course. Alex Johnson shuddered, remembering what he wanted to talk about. But he couldn't back down. And he wasn't the right man. Once he'd made a decision, he'd never change it. At least not until now. I've been diagnosed, he said grimly. I won't last 6 months. So there's no need to worry, is there? After all, I'm not a boy anymore. Turning 65 isn't so old, and it's not so young. But I still have to die. You know when you get sentimental thoughts like that, you're thinking about something you don't understand, like your soul, trying to summarize. I've never done that, and I won't do it again. But I have some questions that maybe you can answer. I'll try, the priest replied. But if you tell me what the questions are, I'll tell you at once. It will be a long story. Do I have time? You have time. Well, here it is. You are probably looking at me and thinking, where did the man get so much money? He must have stolen it. The answer is, he stole it. That's where it all started, with one such theft. I grew up in the countryside, and in those years when there was no talk of rights, I didn't go hungry. But when I came to the city to study, that's when I realized that life in the countryside is so bad. What do you care about bad roads? Snow in winter, mud for a month in spring, your shirt tears behind your neck. But in the city you have roads, transportation, and cleanliness. Stores, libraries, hot water running from the tap. Seem like paradise. But then you spin around and paradise doesn't seem like paradise anymore. Well, yes, everywhere has its nuances. Agreed Father James. Right. I had a scholarship, but it was just enough to feed me, not enough for a young guy. I was hungry. Simple as that. Go to the movies, buy ice cream for the girls. They didn't take care of them the way they do now. Everything was simpler. But I was in agony, so I decided to get a part-time job. And where to go? I chose the easiest one. I went to unload railroad cars. By the way, you can't just get there without connections. But I always knew how to negotiate. I'll tell you, it was a hell of a job. I still thought at first that you could work every other day. Then you could get enough sleep and keep up with your studies. How could I not? After the first night, I couldn't get out of bed. You missed lectures, of course. I decided to work once a week. I'd had enough. They paid us well, though. We even formed a kind of a crew of our own. There was a student like me from the orphanage. I had to get away from him. Some fat guy would come in, and he was the only one in our brigade who was rich. It was sickening to look at him, such embodied snobbery. Why'd he take a job like that? I don't know. He had some kind of delusion in his head. He said his father once said to him, "You, son, you live on everything." At my age, I don't know what it was at his age, but our rich guy got mad. He decided to prove that he was just as good. And then there was this other guy who was all grown up. I don't know exactly how old he was, some cool-hole told me. I don't know what his soul was in, but he was strong. For any of us boys, he outstripped everyone in his work, and he didn't even seem to get tired. Who was he? Where was he from? We didn't know that. Was he quiet at all? Silent. Didn't take part in conversations at all. True, there was a rumor about him that he was a thief, and not one of the last, and they said that he worked at the same job during the day, the main job, the thief's job. But at night he couldn't sleep because his conscience tormented him. So he comes here as if to work honestly. That's what our rich man told us. But he was a great talker. We laughed and forgot about it. And then there were only two of us left, me and the one from the orphanage. That's the story. The rich guy lost his watch, and he had some super expensive, fancy watches. By the end of the shift, he noticed, and he got mad at us saying we stole it from him, especially the kid from the orphanage. Grinch and I thought he was rich because he was poor. He's got no one to lean on in life. He didn't think of me because I told him right away, if you don't want to search me right now, if you want, I'll empty my pockets myself. I didn't swallow your watch. Nobody thought about the fourth one because he was a bit confident, wasn't he? Sitting there smelling of booze, silent. Our rich guy was still on the rampage. He promised to send everyone to jail, but then he spit and left. We never heard from him again. He never kept his word. And I guess I know why. He was ashamed that he'd been robbed alive of such trinkets. And he didn't even notice. And he's a fool himself. Who would wear such things to a black job? And he didn't even realize to take it off. But the rich guy got away from us, and that's fine. The three of us worked together from now on. And then, probably after a month or so, our young strong man stopped coming to work. We worked one shift without him. The second shift went on without him again. And we were worried about him. Maybe he got sick and there was no one to help him. We asked the bosses for his address and went straight from the morning. We found him. With difficulty, though. He was in some back alley, but the house itself, as long as I live, I've never seen a worse sight. It's a wreck. A few windows broken out, not a soul in the yard, only hungry dogs running around. As I remember now, one was a shabby red one, and the other was a small black one. The boy from the orphanage suddenly turned white. He was shaking all over. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I can't go on. I'll go to such an institution myself." As I remember, his father was his only parent. He drank every day, chased the boy when he was taken to the orphanage. His back was black with bruises, he told me. I won't go any further, and you don't go either. That's how his memories came apart. Poor guy. I said to him, "You better go to your dorm, and I'll take care of things here myself." But I found the door, and there was no bell at all. I knocked, they didn't open. I knocked again silence. And then, I don't know why, I pressed the handle and the door opened by itself. I go in quietly, I think, but Grandma's still standing there. I went into the room. I see our strong man lying on the bed drying wood, his back to me. I wanted to call him, and suddenly I realized, "Alex Johnson, why aren't you at work?" So I called out to him, and he didn't answer. And then I noticed something was wrong. I couldn't see him breathing. I came closer, shook him by the shoulder, and he was falling on his back, dead. But somehow, I wasn't frightened at all. But I noticed that the mattress was moved from one edge, and something was shining there. It turned out to be the watch of our rich son. That's when I realized it wasn't a rumor. He was having an affair with this nameless guy. I moved him on the floor, lifted the mattress. The bed was an old bed with a broken net, and he'd lined it from edge to edge with money. And I took it. I took all the money. "What was in there?" the priest asked. "There was a lot. I didn't touch the watch," I answered. But then, about 20 years later, I saw it in a pawn shop and bought it. Here they are. I raised my hand and showed my wrist. But I didn't steal it. No, that's where it all started. It gave me my start, if I may say so. I left the institute, though. I moved to another city, even this one, and it was easier there and not interesting. In short, I got up on my own. You see how. But now I guess it's time to think about it. I robbed that dead man. A thief. Yes, but I still took someone else's stuff. I never thought about it before. Now I dream I'm back in that horrible house, and I see the dead man, and I move him to the floor like I did then. I start to collect the money. Suddenly, someone grabs me from behind by my jacket. I turn around, and the dead guy's eyes are wide open. It's like he's going to grab me by the throat. I woke up screaming a couple times. I was sedated. Will God forgive me for this theft? I asked. Father Ethan, the priest, looked up at me. He forgave you long ago. He forgives everyone. It's you who can't forgive yourself. What am I supposed to do now? I don't know, Father Ethan smiled. You must decide what you need to do to forgive yourself. The answer will be found. And how will it be found? Do whatever you need to do. That's all I can tell you. Thank you. The man mumbled, shocked by the simplicity of the answer. Thank you, Father." He turned abruptly on his heels and headed for the park exit. There was still plenty of time to meet Martha. "So you want to register with us?" A full-figured lady with mind-blowing red curls asked him. "Why do they all like red color so much?" Alex Johnson thought with disgust. The older they are, the redder they are. Of course, he was lying, and he realized it himself. But the lady was so striking, with green branches in her hair and gold rings, with long sharp nails and scarlet lipstick. And her office was stuffy with heavy perfume with a kind of defiant scent. In short, he didn't feel like being fair. "I've already told you that I'm not the right age," he replied. But the lady sighed. "No, you are. It just seems to me that with your capabilities you could find a more comfortable boarding house. I mean, it's basically just an ordinary nursing home here." "That's fine. When can I move in?" The lady sighed again. "I'll give one of my apartments to the nursing home," he said. "That should be enough, right? But I want to move as soon as possible, preferably today." "What do you say, Alex Johnson?" She said. "Yeah, sorry. What do you say, Alex Johnson? I hope you know what you're doing." When he returned a few hours later, he immediately saw Martha and her son. The boy looked remarkably like his mother, tall, slender, blonde. They were strolling through the square and talking passionately about something, laughing every now and then. "Martha," Alex Johnson called out to her. "Do you remember me?" She stopped and held out her hand to him. "Of course. Is this where you were looking for you?" Martha asked. "Is this your son?" "Yes, Kyle," she introduced the boy. He shook his hand in an adult. "Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you, young man," the man played along. "I'm Alex Johnson. If you don't mind, I'd like to discuss something with your charming mother." Martha laughed. "Kyle, take another walk. I'll catch up with you soon." "Martha, have a seat," Alex Johnson suggested. "I'm tired. I find the bench very comfortable. Let's sit for a few minutes." They sat in silence. She was quite relaxed, exposing her face to the sunlight. He, gathering his wits, didn't know how to start the conversation. "Have you found anything for yourself? A place to live or a job?" Martha asked. "Not yet. But Father Ethan sometimes gives me a chance to earn a little money. There are a lot of flowers in this park, and you have to take care of them. And he pays you for it." "Yeah, just a little, you know. Listen, Martha, I have a proposition for you." He finally decided. There was a slight surprise on her face, her blonde, disheveled hair a smile. "I want to offer you my house. That is, I want to give it to you. Don't interrupt. Listen to me. I have enough money, and you won't have to worry about maintenance. I'll arrange it. You and your boy won't be destitute. And if you want to work, well, you'll do it. Just for your own sake. Agreed?" Martha moved her eyebrows slightly, scrutinizing his face. "Are you crazy?" she asked. He laughed briefly, nervously. "Worse, I'm a corpse." "What's that?" "I look quite alive. It won't last long. 2 months, maybe 3. It's a diagnosis, you see. When a man is on the edge of the grave, he gets scared, especially if he has no one to leave behind, no one who will remember him well. That's the kind of man I am, and that's why I'm asking you to accept. The house, the money, it's all yours. You need it. I need it too. Let me do a good deed, Martha. Please." She was silent for a long time, staring at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you want to do this for me? Aren't there many people who need help?" "Plenty," he agreed. "But you were the one I met." There was a deafening silence in the house. Alex Johnson was startled by the silence and only then remembered that he had stopped all the clocks himself the day before. But Martha didn't seem to be deterred. "How nice is it here?" she said, looking around. "It's so spacious." "There's plenty of room for everyone," he smiled. "You and Kyle. And then maybe you'll get married again, and then we'll scale." "Everything here belongs to you now," Alex added. Martha looked around again. "Then can I take a bath? I've been dreaming about it for so long. A human bath." "You can," he laughed. "You go up to the 2nd floor and down the hall to the right. And I'm moving out of here." "Martha, where?" Her voice sounded slightly frightened. "To a nice boarding house. I'll be better there, but I'll be back tomorrow to make some arrangements for the house. I'll need to include you in the will, and a few other little things. I mean, you'll have to register here, for instance. I'll be here tomorrow, so to speak, for a visit. Now go to the bathroom like you wanted. I'm afraid to be alone, she confessed. Maybe I can't stay. I need medical attention, Martha said softly. Well then, of course, thank you, Alex Johnson, for all of this. Thank you, yes. And by the way, he took the calendar out of his pocket and put it on the table. I'm returning it. Decided I don't need it anymore. Why? She wondered. Alex Johnson, wink. I don't want to count the days. The room the full-figured lady gave him looked more like a hotel room. 2 bedrooms, a bed, cable TV, and a huge vase of fruit on the table. We've got some pretty good nursing homes here, he said ironically. We try, the lady smiled. But of course, we don't have many rooms like this. For now, then move me to a regular room, he said. Keep this room for the others. In this sense. What? Why so? You deserve them. Besides, we are happy to give you better conditions. What do I want in an ordinary room? He bellowed. Like everyone else. So do I. Understandably, she didn't object. In Alex Johnson's regular room, the roommate was some grim old man who lay on the bed, turned his back to the wall, and didn't respond to any attempts at conversation. For dinner, they served creepy mashed potatoes with meat gravy and kefir. It was accompanied by 2 cookies, which Alex refused. He never liked sweets. Back in his room, he went to bed. The neighbor was still lying, turned away from the world, but at least he was alive. The blanket he was covered with rose and fell in time with his breathing. Why am I here? Alex asked himself, but he found no answer. He was certainly glad that he was able to help Martha and her son, but he wasn't happy about his stay in the nursing home at all. What was he waiting for? Remorse? Humility, a chance to atone for his long-standing transgression by eating government food and sleeping in a government bed? He didn't know. It was past midnight when he finally managed to fall asleep. Alex Johnson arrived at the house given to Martha by noon and did not expect any surprises. However, just as he approached the door, he heard shouting. "You bastard!" yelled a male voice. "You sneaky bitch tricked me. Not only have you meddled in my affairs, but your affairs are unclean," shouted Martha. "And if I'd known what you were up to before, I'd never have lived with you. But then, of course, it suited you. After all, eating, drinking, buying you rags with my money, you liked it. I didn't know where the money came from. Do you realize what you've been doing? You took a client away from me. And that, you creep, is what I've been doing just fine," the man hissed. "He ran away to a nursing home. And that Trump left you everything. Where am I supposed to look for him now?" "You don't have to look for him. I'm here," Alex Johnson said softly as he opened the door. Martha and her guest froze in surprise. Then the man turned around slowly, very slowly. "Hello," Alex Johnson muttered and grinned, looking directly into the eyes of his attending physician. "I've come to talk to you about a further treatment regimen to offer supportive therapy. Met this woman here who brazenly claims this is now her home. What's going on?" Alex was completely confused. "Hey, Smith, and I was told you were in an accident. Reanimation, all that stuff. You've made a speedy recovery." Martha lowered her eyes to the floor. 2 red spots were clearly visible on her cheekbones, either from anger or shame. "What happened here? How do you know this man, and why were you both yelling like that?" she asked Alex Johnson. "I don't know, of course I don't," he reassured her. "And how would you know who I was being treated by? But I've heard so many interesting things here, I'd like an explanation." "We'll talk," Smith said grimly, not wanting to listen to all the slander she would undoubtedly spout. "Alex Johnson, I want you to know that whatever you're hearing right now is as far from the truth as a commercial is from real life. And that's why, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to leave you." He tugged on his jacket, threw a fierce glance at Martha, and headed for the door. Alex Johnson blocked his path. "Wait, there's no hurry. Martha, please explain what I just heard. I'm warning you. Anything she says—" "Shut up," Smith grumbled. "Alex Johnson, this guy is my ex-husband," Martha began. "When we got married, we lived very poor. We rented a tiny apartment, but after a couple years, things suddenly started to change. We had money, our own place. My husband said that he got a favorable offer, and he went to work in a very expensive private clinic. The pay was good there, he told me. I didn't go into details because Kyle was very young. I was all about him. He was sick a lot as a kid. Anyway, I didn't really care about the details, but a few more years went by, and I happened to overhear a couple of his phone conversations. To be honest, by then I was sure he had a mistress. It had better be so. I found out that my husband had become a real criminal. That was the worst part. What? Illegal drugs? Alex Johnson asked, but Martha shook her head. No, he came up with something more serious. When this guy realized that his clinic was full of rich people, he quickly offered to organize a hospice for them. Naturally, also insanely expensive. He devoted his plan only to the doctor and a couple of other people he needed for the case. And then all he had to do was make arrangements with the lab. They would fake the test results and inform the person that they had a fatal diagnosis, usually to elderly people who were used to trusting doctors. Don't believe, Smith began, but Alex Johnson waved him away. Go on, Martha. It's very interesting. I love convoluted scams. These men were often chosen by those who had no family, no one to educate them. They believed they didn't have long to live and agreed to move into a hospice. They were persuaded that they needed medical supervision and care. They agreed and paid a lot of money. It's a very simple Martha finished. Trust in specialists, Alex Johnson nodded. Then the shocking news. After agreeing to whatever the doctor suggests, and if you don't have family to convince you to take the tests at another clinic, and not everyone dares to tell their friends. It's really quite simple. Yes, Martha agreed. I couldn't live with a man like that, so I left. And he promised me that if I ever told he'd take my son away from me, and he had every opportunity to do so, he intimidated me. So I gave up all property claims, walked away with only what I had on me. So he would have succeeded, but Kyle is more important and dearer to me. You didn't prove anything. You're homeless. Just rented by your ex-husband to a bum who's unknown where she sleeps, maybe in a dumpster. You call yourself a loving mother. You couldn't even overcome your laziness for your son's sake. Get a job. Hawkins snapped back. I worked, nursed a sick child who gave me a second chance not to fool myself as a 5-year-old and had a dizzying career. You're lazy, capable of nothing. Who's going to believe you? I'll believe you, Alex Johnson said. Let's call the police. I'm sure we'll be doing the policemen a favor. They'll no doubt be interested in your ex-husband. And you'll prove it, Hawkins sniggered. That all this infernal nonsense is true? We'll prove it, Alex Johnson promised him. We'll start by double-checking the tests of those in the hospice and mine too. 2 weeks later, 12 hospice patients gathered at Alex Johnson's house. A check revealed that all of them had no terminal illnesses. The fraudulent doctor and his accomplices were under investigation, and it was clear that they would not get off scot-free. On this occasion, Alex Johnson organized a big party. He enjoyed watching his guests, who still could not seem to believe that their lives were not over. They enjoyed tasting the food Martha had prepared, savoring the expensive wine, and making plans. Thus Martha walked between the guests and took time to smile at each of them and give them a few warm words. She looked remarkably better from a skinny little girl to a lovely young woman. What a wonderful, well-read, intelligent, funny boy Kyle turned out to be. Alex Johnson played chess with him every night, and the boy was already making progress. He should have enrolled him in the chess section, unnoticed by himself. Alex Johnson began to think of Martha and Kyle as his family. He'd never felt as warm and joyful with anyone as he did with these people who had been randomly given to him by fate. Or say, please, he heard a woman's voice say, "Is this girl your spouse?" He turned around and saw before him a short woman in her 50s. She was seeing Martha off with a thoughtful look. "Martha is my daughter," Alex Johnson replied. She lives here with my grandson, Kyle." "How nice," the woman smiled, and Alex Johnson noted that her smile had a very young, cheerful quality to it. And then there were the wonderful blue eyes like Martha's, full of sparkle. "You know," she admitted quietly. For I was sure that now only death lay ahead. Sitting in a growing stupor, drips, waiting, and now suddenly I've been given the gift of life. And everything seems so appealing to me. "I understand you," Alex smiled. "Would you say you feel like you've been reborn?" "That's right." She took a cautious sip from her glass out of habit. "It's so delicious. I haven't tasted wine in a year, and now I'm afraid it's going to hit my head. Though I suppose it's all right on an occasion like this. But you know, there's something I'd like to ask you. You seem so confident, so knowledgeable. And what was it you wanted to ask?" Alex inquired. You see, she looked a little visibly embarrassed. I'm so used to the idea of imminent death that I'm completely confused now. But I'm so glad I'm going to live. But what about freedom? Maybe you can tell me? Alex Johnson smiled. How familiar was this feeling to him? With a smile, he held out his hand for her to dance. They waltzed smoothly around the room, and looking at them, the other guests began to pair up as well. Alex Johnson noticed Martha's joyful smile and pressed his partner a little tighter to him. He felt warm at heart. Now I have a family, a daughter, a grandson, and maybe there will be a woman I love too. Happy thoughts, he thought. Ex-fiancé and best friend decided to humiliate Emma by inviting her to their wedding and seeing MP4. The slender girl whirled into the hospitably opened doors. Missing the greeting, the guest declared to the hostess, who by the spectacular figure was not inferior to Emma. Get dressed quickly. The screening starts in half an hour, and we have to get there. Hey, Caroline, what are you doing? What screening? Where are we going? The guest, almost jumping with impatience, gestured vigorously, as if trying to give her friend the necessary acceleration, and snidely asked again. What viewing? Couldn't you ask anything cleverer? Well, not the cookery one, the dance one, of course. Come on, Wall Street, we're running out of time. You seem a little slow today, and you don't look very fresh. All the same, why don't you put on a quick face mask or something? The hostess sighed and tried to explain her tiredness to the energetic Caroline and politely declined to participate in the viewing. I'm sorry, I'd rather rest at home, to be honest. Grandma's not feeling well. Her blood pressure in the morning was off the charts in my memory. I even had to call an ambulance. Just the other day, the general practitioner came round and wrote a lot of tests to be taken tomorrow. I'm going to call an on-site lab for Granny so I don't have to go to the clinic. So, Caroline, I wish you good luck, and I'll keep my fingers crossed for you. The guest twisted at her temple, showing what she thought of her interlocutor. What are you trying to do, Emma? Set me up. I sent a video of our doubles performance to the preliminaries. After I got the message that I liked the dance, I officially applied for the duet section. A duet is two people. If I suddenly appear on stage alone, my number the jury will not look at. Urgently looking for a partner is also a dubious endeavor. Emma didn't hold back her indignation and asked her friend directly. Shouldn't you have asked me if I wanted to perform and fight with competitors for something unknown? Seeing that Emma wasn't giving in to flattery, Caroline changed her tone to a pleading one. I'm begging you, Emma. Please, 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 please. It's not like I ask you for anything that often. You're our signature program. Even if I wake you up in the middle of the night, you'll do it perfectly. You and I are a perfect team. I can't find such a talented partner, even if I search for several years. Especially since we have a little over 2 hours before the screening. An older woman came out to the voices in the corridor and said hello to the guest. Caroline, good afternoon. Hello, Mrs. Isabella. Emma perked up. Grandma, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? The woman shook her head. I'm fine, Emma. You've heard, haven't you? The doctor said you should move around a bit if your blood pressure is more or less within normal limits. I just measured it. It's 130/95. If it goes down any further, I could go into space. I'll go to the kitchen and make some tea. The guest decided to make a move on her friend's grandmother. Mrs. Isabella, how are you feeling? Maybe I can run and get some medicine while Emma is getting ready? The woman smiled. You were a foxy little fox, and you're still a foxy little fox. There's no need to run out for medicine. I've got everything I need. I'm sorry, girls, but I accidentally heard bits of your conversation, even though I wasn't listening. So why don't you tell me where you need to get Emma all of a sudden? Caroline's voice sounded pitiful, almost tearful. To watch the dance competition, Miss Isabella. It's practically a matter of life and death for me. Emma refuses. The woman looked carefully at Caroline, who folded her hands in a pleading gesture, shifted her gaze to her granddaughter, and looked into her eyes and asked, Sweetheart, you should probably get some rest, shouldn't you? I've tortured you with my caprices. So girls, let's go and have tea. Surely this is not the last contest that will be held. Caroline knew perfectly well that it was useless to argue with her friend's grandmother. The girl obediently threw off her shoes and headed to the bathroom to wash her hands with fragrant scented soap. She couldn't stop thinking of arguments that would help her to make her friend keep her company at the contest. Sitting down at her long-established seat at the table in her best friend's house, Caroline turned to her grandmother again. "Mrs. Isabella, you see, this contest is not the most ordinary or simple. Winning it will be a chance to completely change a life. You see, even though it's a regional competition, the winners get a trip to the capital. Frankly speaking, I understand that at the qualifying stage you have to stand out so much to distinguish yourself from the crowd of talents. And then there will be training, and during it you will be able to polish your movements almost to perfection. The main thing for me is to get through the first round, but without Emma, it will be much more problematic. Especially since I applied for a duet. I'm sorry I didn't consult her. That's my mistake, I admit. But it was in good faith." Emma objected, but not in a mean-spirited way. "You could have asked my opinion on the phone. We're in touch all the time, and you haven't even hinted at it once." Feeling that her friend was not angry, grumbling only because she was a little hurt by her arbitrary decision to participate in the contest, Caroline continued her persuasion. "Mrs. Isabella, you must understand that Emma has nothing to lose by going to this screening for fun. If she doesn't like the idea, if she doesn't want to compete, then she doesn't have to do it anymore. I promise that after successfully passing the qualifying round, I will not insist on anything. I'll swear on anything. I just want to get through the auditions. Please, Mrs. Isabella, let Emma come with me. Look how much better she looks already. She's got that tea blush on her cheeks, hasn't she? Help me out." The girl turned to her friend. Caroline was a persistent persuader. Emma trembled and looked at her grandmother and asked, "Are you actually feeling well, or are you just trying to make me feel better?" The woman smiled. "I'm actually fine. Go on, my soul. Have fun," Mrs. Isabella said. Caroline clapped her hands and ran up to hug her friend's grandmother. "Thank you, Mrs. Isabella. You are awesome. The coolest grandma in the world, and a sly vixen." The woman smiled, and while her granddaughter gathered herself, began to ask her guest about the well-being of her family. Soon Emma announced to her friend that she was ready, and the girls headed to the casting. They decided not to spend money on a taxi. On the way to the place of the contest, Emma involuntarily thought that, however it was, it could not be otherwise. After all, how could she refuse her best friend, with whom they share the joys and problems in half for more than half of their lives? The girls met at a children's sports camp. They were in different squads and almost did not communicate, but having gone through a curious situation, they became best friends. It was a passion for dancing that first became a reason for heightened competition, and later brought them closer due to a similar level of wealth. The parents of the girls were about the same level and could afford to pay for an expensive hobby. Emma and Caroline studied at prestigious choreography studios in the city, but in different neighborhoods, and went to training with sincere pleasure. During the summer holidays, both girls missed their favorite activity. So when a talent contest was announced in the camp, they decided to take part. Of course, each of them prepared to perform a dance number. The camp management provided a place for everyone to practice, which, however, was not very many. The opening time of the detached one-story building with a hall and a stage was limited, so that willy-nilly the participants knew quite well what their opponents would emphasize. It wasn't to say that Caroline's training at her choreography studio was shoddy, but she was jealous that Emma was not as good at some of the elements as she was at others. Besides, her rival practiced with complete dedication. Even outside of rehearsals, Emma was immersed in her thoughts. She walked along the paths for a long time, then stopped, wrote something in a small notebook, and went on. No matter how hard Caroline tried, she couldn't see what Emma was writing down. The day of the contest came quickly. There was literally no empty space in the hall. After all, let's face it, there wasn't a lot of entertainment in the camp. According to the draw, Emma had to perform right after the magician, who opened the talent parade. Going on stage, the girl brilliantly began her performance to a song familiar to everyone. However, as soon as the first lines of the second verse were heard from the speakers, the music stopped and silence hung in the hall. Only the girl on the stage behaved as if nothing had happened and continued her dance. She, as well as before, managed to look into the hall so that it seemed that she looked into the soul of each spectator. Emma's lips moved slightly. Apparently, she was still humming the song softly, helping herself not to get lost in the dance. It was fantastically beautiful. The silence was suddenly broken by a lone voice coming from somewhere in the back rows, blasting the popular lines out loud. The unknown soloist was then joined by other audience members. Soon almost the entire auditorium, including not only teenagers but also a good portion of the staff, picked up the familiar lines. One of the contestants, who was standing with a guitar backstage waiting for his entrance, began to strum the melody on the instrument. As Emma performed, she made several deep curtsies to each side of the auditorium, as if there were nobles there, as well as to her unexpected musical accompaniment backstage. Smiling, she sent air kisses to everyone, at which point the applause started. As a result, the first prize was awarded to Emma. The silver prize winner was a young man who played the guitar perfectly and won many hearts. Third place honors went to Caroline. She didn't seem upset. She found the strength to congratulate those who had beaten her, thanking the judges in the audience. That night, after lights out, Caroline went to Emma's cabin and called her in to talk. The winner did not refuse. At Caroline's suggestion, they went to the dining room so that, she said, they could not be overheard by curious neighbors, and sat down on a bench. The silence lengthened and Emma asked, "Well, what did you want? Speak quickly, because I'm tired and I'm falling off my feet." "Anyway, I just wanted to admire your performance. You were great, you were great. You handled an unusual situation very well. Didn't get confused and danced everything without a hitch." Emma was pleased to hear the praise from a peer who knew about dancing, and she confessed, "In general, it's not really my merit. Our coach once told us that at any level of competition you have to be ready for anything." She gave an example of how once at the World Figure Skating Championships in the early 70s, one of the pairs competing for the Soviet Union found itself in a terrible situation. The musical accompaniment during the program simply switched off. However, the Soviet skaters continued to perform the elements as if nothing had happened. The secret was that they were practicing differently at the insistence of their coach. The whole pattern of the dance, or I don't remember exactly how they call the sequence of elements, was subordinated to a strict rhythm, calculated by seconds. And the absence of music in the middle of the performance was not a disaster. Of course, it was much more difficult for them than for me today. Can you imagine the difference in the scale of the competition? Plus, no one was singing along. I had that inspirational example in mind today too, and the incredible support from the audience was palpable. Caroline was thrilled. Originally, when she challenged her rival to a meeting, she just wanted to know her secret. Now she decided to become her friend. Emma accepted the offer to communicate. They exchanged what they knew, and even came up with a few dance routines to perform at the Parents' Day. The girls came up with a little number and drew a flurry of applause. Upon returning to town, the girlfriends continued to socialize. Caroline even went to the studio where Emma trained. As they grew up, slim, young, perfectly dancing beauties invariably attracted attention at discos. The girls together entered the Institute of Culture and managed to reach the equator, when the happy, quiet life of Emma collapsed overnight. Her parents were killed in the family car. As soon as they had driven a little away from the car park at the shopping center, the car flew into the air. The doctors were powerless to do anything. The girl was saved only by the fact that she was not feeling very well that day and stayed at home, not going shopping with her parents. She lay on the sofa under a warm woolen plaid and drank tea with lemon, trying to overcome the malaise as soon as possible. When Emma saw her grandmother opening the door of her dead daughter's flat with her own key, she realized that something irreparable had happened. Mrs. Isabella hugged her granddaughter and whispered the bitter news in her ear. The girl could not find a place for herself. It seemed to her that if she had gone with her parents, she would have noticed something wrong and prevented the death of her loved ones. She tried not to upset her grandmother, but at times tears dripped from her eyes when she was reminded of her parents. During that terrible period, Caroline became a real support for Emma. She literally moved into Mrs. Isabella's flat, where Emma's friend had moved after the tragedy, and kept her grief at bay. She lived there, almost forcibly took her to the institute, forced at least something to eat. To the surprise of many neighbors and vain gossipers, the perpetrator involved in the massacre of Emma's parents managed to detain. And the main merit belonged not to the law enforcement agencies, which, as if someone sent a directive not to be too active in the search for the criminal, the grandmother spared no expense to punish not only the murderer, but also the customer of the massacre of the only adored daughter and son-in-law, whom she, contrary to popular belief, respected and loved. Mrs. Isabella sold her jewelry and carefully shielded her granddaughter from the details of the investigation and court proceedings. She seriously feared for Emma, for her psychological state, even 6 months after the tragedy, was deplorable. As soon as the girl approached the house where the flat where she lived with her parents was located, she would become hysterical. Emma couldn't forgive herself for staying alive. To return to the place where she had once been happy, the girl refused flatly. Mrs. Isabella didn't insist. It was not easy for her, and alone she would probably have gone mad. Her granddaughter and the punishment of criminals were her pillars of sanity. Emma was holding on, partly because of her grandmother, and not without Caroline's help, trying to continue living in her new reality. The financial situation was visibly shaken, and Mrs. Isabella, after much deliberation, arranged a home council with her granddaughter. "Girl," said Mrs. Isabella, "I realize that we are going to have a difficult conversation, but I will not make important decisions without you. I know you don't throw away your home, but I'm sorry to have to rent it out. I'm afraid we'll end up with ruin instead of money. What do you think?" "Grandma, you're right. It would be too hard for me to stay there," Emma said. "I can't find a proper job yet, and I don't feel comfortable with you supporting me." The woman hugged her granddaughter tightly. She was glad Emma didn't cry. During the short but emotionally heavy conversation, the process of selling her daughter's flat began. During those tragically difficult days, as the woman thrashed around the city trying to get justice and dealing with other issues, Caroline had supported her friend. She'd even tried to drag Emma out to all sorts of fun events. But it was to no avail. However, Emma knew that Caroline had met some guy at one of the discos she couldn't get her out to. And now, after making sure her friend was in a relatively normal state, she was spending all her free time with him. Emma had a slip of resentment at the fact that it was as if Caroline was hiding her suitor from her. But it all became clear after another serious conversation with her grandmother. One day, Mrs. Isabella, who had aged sharply after the tragic events, seeing that her granddaughter was sad over her notes, sat down opposite her, and looking into her eyes, spoke. "My girl, I know that you had to grow up very early, but that's the way fate has it. Actually, that's not what I wanted to tell you. It's inevitable that you and Caroline are seeing less of each other. It was bound to happen one day. You can't be around everywhere, or it's not normal. You shouldn't be offended that she doesn't introduce you to her beau." "That's quite easily explained," said Mrs. Isabella. "It is the way of the world that love always comes before friendship." "But I'm not going to steal the boy away from Caroline," Emma objected indignantly. Grandmother smiled. "I didn't think so. Caroline doesn't suspect you of evil intentions, of course. But instinctively she's trying to spend more time with her boyfriend and not involve you in their meetings, so as not to dissipate his attention. Men are a windy people. Not all of them, of course, but alas, a great many. So I don't want you to take offense or be too trusting. I didn't tell you, but you have a right to know. Your parents, as it turns out, were killed by people they thought were good friends. Just remember that you can only trust yourself completely, unconditionally, and truly. Be especially careful when you fall in love. Happiness loves silence. The less you brag, the better." Emma nodded, listening to her grandmother. Everything was falling into place. Resentment against her friend evaporated like raindrops from the hot asphalt. The girl carefully memorized all the words of the only native person. She had always admired her grandmother, and now she was a little ashamed that she had left her favorite relative unattended. Of course now, having almost reached the right stop, it was silly to go back. All that remained was to perfectly fulfill her friend's request and get home faster. Scraps of triumphant, sad and instructive memories managed to rush through Emma's mind while they were traveling to the casting even before arriving at the place. The girl's musings were interrupted by Caroline's enthusiastic monologue, anticipating success. "Very soon we'll get our diplomas, and then hello, new life in the capital. The prospects will be better than in our small town." Emma thought she was used to her best friend's ambition and spontaneous actions. But Caroline still managed to surprise Emma, and she objected to her friend standing up for her hometown. "You're a bit of a bastard, Caroline, calling our city of over 1 million people a small town. That's just wrong. Besides, how's your boyfriend Anthony going to feel about it?" Something happened that had never happened in our long years of friendship. Caroline was embarrassed to hear such a question, and to avoid answering, she abruptly turned the conversation to the details of the upcoming performance. As they approached the contest venue, Emma's misgivings grew more and more preoccupied. Judging by the fact that the queue to the old building, which had once been a cinema, was stretched out in a thin snake almost halfway, long delays were becoming obvious. Two things. Firstly, the competition looks like it's going to be tough. And secondly, the casting is not organized in the best way. However, after the girls stood for about an hour amongst similarly eager to become famous in the field of dance, the queue suddenly began to move a lot faster. When Caroline and Emma finally waited their turn to perform, it became clear what the reason for this sudden acceleration was. They had barely had time to perform a couple of moves when the person sitting in the center of the jury table shouted, "Well done. Bravo. That's enough. Wait. In the next room, we need to discuss the concept of further development of your duet. There's water, tea, healthy sweets. Get some rest. You'll be invited to an interview later." Emma didn't care, because she had agreed to participate in the very initial stage at the insistence of her stubborn friend. But Caroline's hands were almost trembling. She was afraid to hear that the project didn't need a dance duet. Emma, sensing Caroline's excitement, whispered softly, "I think I've accomplished my mission. Now I can refuse to participate in the competition, so as not to take the place of girls who dream of getting into the project." Caroline's heart was relieved, and she entered the improvised waiting room with the good mood provided by her best friend's support. The building used to be a cinema, as it had been when it was built, but it had been a cafe. So in a fairly spacious room that already held about 15 lucky people, Caroline and Emma had no trouble finding a seat for themselves. The atmosphere was nervous. The pretty middle-aged brown woman who was in charge of distributing supplies and keeping order was smiling sweetly at the contestants, pouring tea and water, offering candy and something that looked like homemade marshmallows. Emma refused the treats. Caroline, on the other hand, politely thanked the woman whose name Mia was on her jacket and enjoyed the sweets and tea. Sipping her drink, she whispered to her friend, "Why are you shy? This very Mia is here, as I think, for a reason. She's probably looking at the contestant's character. Whoever's rude to her is not going to make it past the qualifying round. Again, look how she looks at everyone carefully, especially if the girls sit in companies. In dance groups, like an astronaut, psychological compatibility is important. So she notices which group is more promising to form." Emma marveled. "But you, Caroline, you're just a consummate strategist." The girlfriend smiled. "That's just the way it is. You just don't know how much I want to get out of here and go to the capital. Parents constantly nagging, study better. Do not go out late." Emma kept silent to keep from crying. She would have been happy to be told what to do by her mom and dad. Emma missed the times when the whole family was together. Thankfully, Emma's painful conversation was interrupted. An acquaintance from the dance studio came over to the girlfriends and they chatted for a while, reminiscing about the past. The conversation helped them forget a little about the tense situation. The number of contestants in the hall did not decrease, and those who went to the room for the interview were replaced by new ones. Soon an old maid of Caroline and Emma's was called in for an interview, and the two of them were called into the room next. In the room, sprawled on the sofa, half reclining, half sitting, was a man who from the first moment had made a most unpleasant impression on Emma. In a manner looking down on the girls from below, though looking upwards, he, slightly stretching his vowels, said, "I am the producer of this project. My name is Anthony. I have to be honest, I've been watching you move on the online camera, and it's impressive. You have a great duet, such cohesion, such harmony, and such plasticity. It's like you're moving without tension. I can see that you're enjoying your performance, and that's very much appreciated. In general, I am ready to make you a unique offer right now to employ you in a capital club." At first, of course, there will be a trial period, but all the tips are yours. Of course, you'll have to learn a little bit. We have our own specifics in our establishment, but I think you girls are talented, capable, and will easily cope. Emma couldn't contain her surprise. What, I wondered, would be a tip for a female member of a dance troupe? Caroline, who already had a picture in her mind of being applauded in a huge hall in the capital, suddenly thought about her friend's reasonable question. Anthony laughed nervously and explained, emphasizing the age of the contestants. And it seems that minors were not allowed on our casting. So where did this naivety come from all of a sudden? Or do you want to break comedy here, batting your eyelashes? We'll have to dance at the club. The customers there are generous and hot. The producer never called the job what it probably was. But Emma realized she needed to get out of that room as quickly as possible. Taking Caroline under her arm, the girl correctly said goodbye. I'm sorry to have taken up your time, but we have to go. And contrary to fears, neither Anthony nor anyone else held the girls back. They walked quietly out of the former cinema building into the street. The always cheerful Caroline sank back, realizing that she'd almost got herself into trouble. Emma cheered her up. Don't worry, there'll be some proper auditions. In the meantime, let's get a taxi. I'm really worried about Gran. Caroline, who was feeling awkward, was uncomfortable to refuse, though she planned to give herself an extraordinary shopping spree to improve her mood. While the girls were in the taxi, Emma asked, "Let's not scare my grandmother with the truth about this fake casting. Let's just say it didn't work out. That's the real thing. She doesn't need to know the details." Sure, right away my friend agreed. I myself do not like to think that I was so easily fooled. You could have checked out the organizer's firm. Okay, I'll be smarter now. Thank you, Emma, for coming with me. Emma smiled at her friend, though frankly she was feeling a little queasy. She'd left her grandmother alone for this fraudulent casting, and she would never forgive herself if something bad happened during that time. To the girl's great relief, Mrs. Isabella was relatively fine. However, the woman promised her granddaughter that she would soon undergo a full examination. Don't worry, I'll pass all the doctors. In the polyclinic at the place of residence, the queue to the cardiologist was scheduled for 3 months in advance. The neurologist was on holiday. There was no endocrinologist at all. In fact, there were only therapists, an ENT, an ophthalmologist, and a gynecologist. Emma smiled sadly, remembering Caroline's comment about her hometown, and mentally agreed with her. Well, it's a city of millions, and the polyclinic in the city center has almost no doctors. At the urging of her granddaughter, who was worried about her health, Mrs. Isabella went to a private clinic, but Emma was adamant. Let's take the money left over from the sale of the flat out of the account, but you'll pass the doctors without such a long wait. The woman had no choice but to comply, and so began her epic journey of visiting the clinic, taking tests and undergoing examinations. Emma, of course, asked her grandmother about the results, but in the hustle and bustle before graduation, she simply did not have time to study what was stated in the statements. Mrs. Isabella was cheerfully reporting to her granddaughter that all the deviations from the norm were just age-related changes, which angered Emma. Nonsense. You're always young. In fact, Mrs. Isabella's health was not as good as she presented it to her granddaughter. In addition to diabetes, the cardiologist was concerned about her heart condition. But the clever woman did not panic and checked the diagnosis elsewhere, then at another clinic. But all the doctors were unanimous the condition was dangerous, and it was necessary to prepare for surgery. Mrs. Isabella diligently followed all the recommendations, and Emma was pleased to note that the feverish blush had disappeared from her grandmother's cheeks. The woman underwent the operation, and it seemed that a new and happy period of life was ahead of her. Having received diplomas, Emma and Caroline decided to open their own choreographic studio, where not only children, but also adults who decided to join dancing could come. The girls staked on an unusual approach. They offered visitors a mix of modern dances, as well as engaged in the production of movements of couples to wedding songs, using an idea from a film once seen. In addition, Emma decided that she would spend her free time sewing, learning from her grandmother. And because from the very beginning to promote the studio, this is not the fastest thing. And extra, saved or earned money will not hurt. Surprisingly, needlework fascinated the girl, helping to distract her from her worries. Moreover, Mrs. Isabella was a patient and knowledgeable teacher, and was happy to share with her granddaughter all the wisdom, which she knew a lot. After only a few months, justifying the most daring hopes of the owners, the studio became a success. Of course, the net profit was out of the question, but still the idea was a success. Emma was happy that she was doing what she loved, both at home and in the company of her best friend. What warmed her soul most of all was the thought that her grandmother did not have to finance their small family alone. All was well for nearly a year. Then suddenly Mrs. Isabella was gone. The girl came home and saw her grandmother lying on the sofa as if resting. She slowly went over to cover her with a plaid, because the flat was quite chilly, because the central heating had already been turned off, and traditionally frost had returned. As soon as the girl came closer, a scream of horror burst out, it seemed, from the very depths of her soul. It was obvious that her grandmother was now beyond saving herself from the cold. The excitement she had experienced had proved fatal to Mrs. Isabella. In the turmoil of saying goodbye to her only relative, Emma found her outlet in the studio, dissolving in the movements, and watching the dancers closely, the girl drove away her pain. Caroline, who seemed to be doing just fine, tried not to flash her happy eyes so as not to annoy her friend, and came to visit her less and less often. Emma was not offended who would want to talk to a sad person. She was disgusted with herself. For a long time, going through fabrics, which her grandmother had accumulated quite a lot of, the girl seemed to have conversations with her favorite relative, and it seemed that this was the only way she would be able, if not to forget about her heartache, then at least to reduce it. One evening, having lost track of time, the girl completely forgot about the rules of safety. When she heard the doorbell ring, she thought it was Caroline, whom she hadn't even seen today. Her friend had warned her that she couldn't make the class because of personal matters, and she'd probably dropped by to tell her something. Eventually, Emma opened the door without looking through the peephole and gasped. She saw an unfamiliar man with a box of cake in his hands. The girl muttered, "You must be mistaken," and started to close the door. However, the man did not allow her to do so and surprised her with an unexpected revelation. "Hello, Emma. How mature you've become. I don't recognize you. Well, I'm not proud. I'll introduce myself. My name is Mr. John Smith. I am your own grandfather." The girl grinned unkindly, remembering what her mother had told her. "Husband disappeared somewhere, left grandma when our mutual daughter went to school. And as far as I know from my mum, he only visited a couple of times. So, Mr. Smith, have a good day and goodbye." The man put his foot on the threshold so that Emma couldn't slam the door in his face as she intended, and in a stern tone that sent shivers down her spine, he said, "Granddaughter, I'm on fire. I own the flat in part. I never divorced my grandmother." She probably didn't care about this formality. "She didn't file for the elements. I got hot. So, dear granddaughter, excuse me, move over and let me pass." The stunned Emma, using all her strength, managed to put on the door chain and shouted to the uninvited visitor, "I'm going to call the police, so you know." The man only smirked. "Call all you want. Even better for you to make sure I'm telling the truth," Mr. Smith said. "I'll also tell you that my granddaughter is the only one who won't let me on the doorstep. I've got a specialty cake from the town of my childhood. I'm sure the cops will love it. I'm just afraid it's going to spoil a bit. So you'd better hurry them up. Tell them it's urgent. Granddad wants to buy you a drink. Go on, and I'll wait for you here." The man removed his foot. Emma slammed the door shut, locked it, and hesitated. Really, would she call the police now, and what would she say? "Come, because there is a relative unknown to me under my door. He does not threaten, does not attack." Thinking, the girl moved away from the door just in case and dialed her friend's number. Briefly explaining the situation to Caroline, Emma asked, "Help me out. I think your cousin knows someone in the police force. Ask him, if it's not too much trouble, how I should go about it." "Got it, don't worry. Give me 10 minutes and wait for my call." Caroline called her excited friend back even a little before the voice deadline and cheerfully informed her, "Wait, me and the backup will be here soon. You will not open the door until I tell you to." "Got it." Emma gave a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Caroline. I owe you one." The girl tiptoed towards the door to see what was going to happen and soon heard soft male voices. It was very difficult to make out who was talking about what, and Emma was cursing herself for insisting on good noise insulation during the renovation. It didn't take long, though. There was a knock at the door, and Caroline, parodying a cartoon character, proclaimed, "Open up, bears here then." In her own voice, she added, "It's okay." Emma let her friend, her cousin Ben, whom she knew a little, her uninvited grandfather, and a strange man into the flat. Caroline introduced him to Emma, and this is Mr. Jake Slow, one of the best lawyers around. He will help settle the matter with the least amount of effort. The man bowed his head and said in a pleasant baritone, although under such unexpected circumstances, "It's a pleasure to meet you. If you don't mind, let's all sit down at the table." Citizen Smith should calmly state the nature of his grievances. "Produce the documents," he has said, Mr. Slow. "If it's not too much trouble, Emma, I'll ask you to prepare receipts for the rent. You can do it for the last month or any month. It's not too fundamental." The lawyer's voice mesmerized the girl. She was already even glad of her grandfather's sudden intrusion, for this mishap had led to a pleasant acquaintance. While Emma went to the other room to get receipts, Mr. Slow had time to study the passport which the girl's grandfather had given him, and held out the document to Ben. "See for yourself, something about the marriage stamp looks odd to me." Cousin Caroline scrutinized the stamp and began to photograph all the pages of the passport. Mr. Smith raised an eyebrow in surprise, but before he could speak, the lawyer asked him an unexpected question: "What shop did you buy the cake from?" The man even proudly introduced himself. "You can't buy that here. In my hometown, in my only confectionery shop, they bake according to old recipes. I went in yesterday before I left and bought some." Mr. Slow nodded. "I guess you and I, Mr. Smith, are countrymen. Only I haven't been back to my native land for perhaps 5 years. Who's in the pastry shop now?" Is it the same Aunt Anne, with her eyelashes glued shut, and her constant quip in response to complaints about the order of the counters: "More dirt, wider faces"? Mr. Smith nodded. "She is." The lawyer rejoiced as if he had been told the most joyous news. "We must go and see how the deceased is still trading." "Aunt Anne has been resting in the ground for about 15 years, replied Mr. Slow. "I doubt if you are a relative of Emma's. Even if you were, according to the receipt she has kindly provided for the last 6 months, you are not even registered here. You have no right to this property. And if you're thinking of suing, you'll only waste your time and money. So my advice to you is to get out of here and don't show up in front of Emma again. Otherwise, I'll find an article under which you can be held administratively or even criminally liable," Mr. Slow said. After listening carefully, the elderly Mr. Smith grabbed his document with surprising ease and headed for the exit. Emma shouted after him, "Take the cake. I don't want anything from you." Mr. Smith did not resist or refuse, and left the flat he had failed to become a full-fledged tenant of. Emma was overjoyed and agreed to let her saviors go only after an impromptu feast. She sincerely thanked her friend Caroline, her cousin Ben, and the lawyer who had so masterfully got her out of trouble. Then she asked a direct question: "Mr. Slow, please name your fee." The man laughed, better just by name. "I'm maybe 7 years older only, and when people address me by my patronymic you, I feel like an old man. In fact, I think you've already paid for everything with your home-cooked meal and this curiosity." Caroline picked up the lawyer's laughter. They were laughing at the hapless imposter. "Neat, Jake, you exposed him. After all, didn't you take a passport photo of that con artist for something?" Caroline's cousin admitted, "Honestly, I just did it for solidity's sake. I thought I'd scare him by doing it. And I think it worked." When the guests left, Emma did not think that the strange incident would have a pleasant continuation. The next morning, however, Jake came to see her. He brought a coffee and a cake from a rather high-status coffee shop, explaining, "This is to apologize for not being able to taste the cake yesterday." The girl thanked the lawyer and, feeling a little awkward, offered to have breakfast together. During the conversation at the table, Emma had the feeling that she had known Jake all her life and that he understood her half-heartedly. They even had the same musical tastes, which wasn't even the case with Caroline, who couldn't stand rock or classical music. Emma wasn't even surprised that her companionship with Jake had become a necessity, a real addiction. Once during another date, the man reluctantly, as if embarrassed, shared with the girl a difficult story of his life. He said that he was married and after the divorce he moved from his hometown of Littleton to the metropolis of New York, where he once studied. That's how I was living before I met you, working, renting a flat close to the office, and I didn't even think I'd ever fall so much in love, Jake confessed. Emma's heart melted from the tenderness of Jake, with whom she felt like behind a stone wall. The girl once suggested to her favorite man to move in with her, and he agreed. As a confirmation of the seriousness of his intentions, he gave her a thin ring as an engagement ring and proposed to get married closer to summer. Can you imagine what a beautiful ceremony could be organized? No, winter also has its charms, but an enchanting photo shoot in nature will not be possible in any way. And I want you to remember our wedding day forever, Jake said. Emma saw Caroline exclusively at work. One day, as she entered the tiny office they proudly called the coach's room, she found her best friend in tears. What happened? Did you get hurt? Should I call a taxi to the hospital? Emma asked. Caroline shook her head. I'm sad. It's just that no one wants me. Emma marveled, really? I need you. Practice is in an hour. Everyone will be waiting for you there. Don't be sad. Caroline cried, you don't even have time to hang out with me now. I don't even have anyone to go dancing with, just to relax with. I'm so lonely. Emma tactfully did not ask where the mysterious beau had gone, which made her friend's eyes shine so much, and suggested to her, why don't you come over to my place tonight? Jake said he'd be working late. He's got somewhere to be. You and me, we're gonna relax. We'll organize a beauty salon at home, all sorts of masks, peeling, she suggested. The girls were in the middle of a fun conversation when Jake returned to the flat. He said hello to Caroline, kissed Emma, and after a moment's thought, invited the girls to an Italian cafe. Since that evening, the man had also taken an active part in making sure his beloved's friend didn't feel neglected and lonely. And at weekends, the groom took the bride and her friend to a country park hotel for a picnic with kebabs or rented a house at a camp where they could go skiing and snowboarding. Emma was genuinely glad that her friend had stopped shedding tears. In addition, things in business also went uphill. The girls had even opened a branch of the studio and had not hesitated to entrust Jake with the paperwork. Emma dreamed that soon her beloved would take her to apply. She had learnt in advance the schedule of the registry office, all the formalities and details, and waited for the fateful day to come. However, the man was alert and affectionate. But even though the last spring month was already over the middle, he did not talk about the official registration of the relationship. Probably Emma would go for some time, as they say, with rose-colored glasses, and did not suspect anything. But one day during a dinner together, she had to leave the company of her fiancé and best friend to talk on the phone with the mother of one of the girls studying in the studio. When Emma returned to the table, she almost caused a scandal when she saw Caroline kissing Jake. The deluded bride had to summon all her self-control to almost calmly report. So Jake, I understand you're worried, so give me your set of keys. I'll get your stuff together and let you know when you can pick it up. Caroline, will you give me back my flat keys too, said the deluded bride almost calmly, summoning all her self-control to her aid. Her friend, however, was not embarrassed and rummaging in her purse, said in a perfectly mundane tone anyway, I'm glad it's finally cleared up. Yes, Jake and I are together now. But come on, don't make a tragedy out of it, okay, Caroline said. I'd like our business not to suffer because of your possible offense. Be professional. I realize it's going to be hard for you to see me. So I suggest we temporarily not cross paths until you cool off. Otherwise, it's scary you'll have steam coming out of your ears. Caroline smiled victoriously, dumping a bunch of keys out of her bag. Taking the keys to Emma's flat off the carabiner, she continued to outline her ideas. We'll split the studios like this. The one closest to my house will be mine. You can safely train in the branch, pay minimum rent, and half of the profit that you will have, you can take for yourself. The rest will be saved in accounts for future development. Seems reasonable and fair to me. Emma wondered, wait, Caroline, are you kidding me? Why on earth would I suddenly have to pay rent and give away profits? I'm actually just as much an owner as you are. Jake tried to reassure the girl he'd just dumped and lost a large part of his income because of her gullibility. We're not scandalizing. People are already looking back at us. Kitten, understand, it happens. Don't blame yourself. You're a wonderful person, a talented and beautiful girl. You'll be fine. Let's stay friends. Caroline teased. "Let's civilize our relationship under new circumstances." "I think you're being overdramatic. I mean, you're the best dance coach in the world. But in business, I'm sorry you don't understand anything. Who signs papers like general powers of attorney, amendments to bylaws without looking? Jake and I are going to run the business. You do what you do best, show me how to dance." Emma remembered that indeed, trusting solely in Jake's verbal recounting without even reading, she had signed a few sheets and flared up. "So you're trying to make me look like a benefactor by knocking me off my feet and taking away the joy of doing what I love." "Oh, you're so good," Emma said indignantly. "But be warned, I will not give up. I'm not going to let you wipe your feet all over me." Grabbing her purse, Emma ran home, not looking back at the calls to stop that the traders shouted after her. At home, running from room to room, turning to the kitchen and bathroom, she grabbed Jake's things she saw and threw them on the bed. Then she tied up the corners of the bedspread and dragged the unexpectedly heavy knot to the door so she could shove it over the threshold as soon as her ex-fiancé arrived. Finished clearing the flat of Jake's belongings, Emma rushed through the papers she had at home. The more the deceived girl immersed herself in reading, checking the meanings of terms on the internet when necessary, the more horror enveloped her. How naive she had been. How insanely gullible. How right her grandmother had been in saying that one should never trust anyone unconditionally. Such a blow from Caroline, whom she considered her best friend, and from her fiancé, Emma couldn't have imagined even in her worst nightmare. The power of attorney she'd given Jake had played a very bad trick. The man had taken advantage of her boundless trust and legally arranged it, so that Emma had almost no rights to the studio. She was no longer a co-owner, but an ordinary employee, and could not even take a holiday or set a convenient working schedule without Caroline's agreement. Emma could have quit now, of course, but she decided to work for at least a month so that she could prepare her escape route, rent a space and set up a new studio, luring in as many clients as possible. She hadn't even spoken to Jake, who'd come to pick up her things. As soon as the bundle with his things was on the landing, she hurried to close the door. Emma went to her beloved studio as if it were hard labor. And after a week, the flow of clients noticeably decreased. Even regular pupils and students began to refuse from classes. Emma blamed herself, thinking that the training lacked enthusiasm and the spark that ignites talent in people who are shy to dance. But one day, one of the first visitors, who became a regular, opened her eyes to what was going on. It turned out that Caroline brazenly simply lures customers to her room, not disdaining any methods. The most harmless method of her ex-girlfriend a lie that Emma is supposedly going to go away, and therefore she does not have time for classes. Thanking for the valuable information, the girl said goodbye to the visitor and went to the coach's room on wobbly legs. She wanted to take her things quickly and, having got home, to have a proper rest. However, she decided first of all to write to her former friend that she was quitting. She immediately fulfilled her intention. The reply message that arrived in the messenger on her phone completely knocked Emma out of her rut. It was a picture of a framed invitation to Caroline and Jake's wedding reception. And with the mocking caption +1 before she could catch her breath, another message arrived: "We would like you not to be angry with us and to share our moment of joy. The uniforms are dressy. Caroline and Jake." Emma was shocked. What had she done to humiliate her like this? Why were the people she thought were her pillars of strength now pushing her into the abyss of despair? Had she misjudged them so deeply? The girl did not know what to do, but clearly understood that in such a state, alone and no way to stay. It is necessary to be somewhere among people, so that the sinful thoughts of the most terrible way of solving problems did not get into her head. Emma went to the nearest park. There are a lot of people there, and at the same time no one's personal space is invaded. If Emma's state of mind could influence nature, the lead gray sky would light up with lightning. People trying to hide from the weather would have been hit in the face by prickly rain, and wind gusts would have torn down the marquees of established street cafes. Except that it was almost the opposite. The mood of one unhappy, humiliated girl did not change anything. The sun shone brightly in the sky. The young greenery on the trees gave a nice thick shade, and the park looked perfect. The unknown landscape designer had obviously tried to create a magnificent landscape, and he had done everything with a soul. The park was much cozier than Emma remembered, and she sat down on a bench to try to get away from all the excitement that had almost made her sick today. She felt like she was performing on stage, and once again the music disappeared. Only this time the girl had no idea what dance she was doing or what tune was playing at all. All that was left was to freeze in confusion and desperately try to figure out what to do next. Right in front of the bench where the girl had settled down were late varieties of proud tulips, which looked, if not winners in life, then definitely masters of the flower beds. I wish I had their self-confidence, thought Emma. And her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a man's voice. "Why are you crying?" Emma, who hadn't noticed she was crying, had no intention of talking to anyone and said nothing to the curious stranger. He went away but soon returned and sat down beside the sad Emma. The stranger had 2 ice creams in each hand and a fluffy cloud of candy floss. The man began to patiently explain to stop the girl who was about to jump up and run away from him. "Don't be frightened, Emma. But I happen to know you, even though we are strangers. I work for a private investigator who was commissioned by your grandmother to work on solving your parents' murder, since we seriously feared that the villains would use every means to affect the course of justice. My boss instructed me to keep an unspoken eye on you. So I guess you could say you've been under my tacit surveillance for months," the man continued. Emma took a closer look at him. He might have glimpsed her once around, but she couldn't be firmly sure of that. The stranger, smiling, introduced himself. Sam Swan, an employee of the secret private agency. After introductions, the man handed Emma an ice cream cone and candy floss, explaining. "They said in the cinema that ice cream seemed to make it more fun, but I thought you might have a sore throat. So I got you some candy floss. I, for one, love cotton candy." Emma was in a bad mood, and she didn't answer Sam very kindly. "You may enjoy it. I try not to eat any of those kinds of sweets." The man smiled. "Well, no, you don't. Really, I can't eat that much myself. Wait, I'll treat those boys who are counting change at the kiosk and I'll be back." She didn't know why, but Emma obeyed and waited for Sam. The assistant detective asked, "You may consider this a professional inquiry, and if you're uncomfortable with it, you don't have to answer. But I'll ask you this, why are you crying on such a lovely day in this beautiful park?" Emma grinned and decided to share her distress. "It might have been a lovely day if it weren't for one thing. Today, 2 traitors have taken to inviting me to a wedding. My ex-fiancé is going to, what was it called, solemnize his marriage to my former best friend. And it's a mock invitation. It's for 2 people. They know I don't have anyone to go with. They're mocking me. I just don't understand why." Without knowing why, the girl briefly told Sam the sad story of her failed love, and the man even whistled. "Listen, Emma, you may not believe this, but my gut tells me that someone elegantly set up your acquaintance with this Jake. You say he seemed to know everything about you, took you at your word, shared your interests. That's pretty smooth. Did you hear the name of Ben, who took your grandfather's passport photos?" The girl answered in the negative but asked, "Why do you need this information?" Sam didn't hold back. "You know, your grandmother was more than generous. I got a very large sum of money for my work, much more than I expected. I found out later from my boss that Mrs. Isabella even sold some of her things to pay for it. You know, I was ashamed of it," Sam continued. "I was young, and I needed the money. Anyway, I didn't pay your grandmother back part of my fee, like I wanted to. I saw you today, and that old feeling of shame came over me. So I guess now I have to sort of return the change in the form of finding out the truth about that grandfather and your ex-fiancé. If you want, come by the agency in 2 days. I'll give you my card with the address and phone numbers, or we can meet at any other place of your choice." The girl, who had been suspicious of Jake's exact match of tastes and attitudes during the conversation with Sam, looked at the card and answered, "I'll come round to the agency the day after tomorrow. It'll be more convenient for me." Emma walked home and thought, indeed, how strange her acquaintance with Jake was developing. It was as if the man knew exactly the way to her heart. He'd even used exactly the kind of perfume she liked, with a top note of lemon and a persistent trail. It wasn't the most obvious choice for the serious, successful lawyer Jake seemed to be. Emma had noticed that he'd crinkled his nose a few times when she danced to the tune of her favorite rock band, even though he claimed to adore their work. When asked why his face grimaced, the man very convincingly, as it seemed to Emma in love at the time, answered about sudden cramps or headaches. Closely examining her memories of the recent past, the jilted bride found more and more oddities. When she got home, Emma was convinced that Jake had done everything he could to gain her trust and move into her flat as her fiancé. Admittedly, he'd succeeded with ease. But what was his goal? Emma kept no cash in the flat. A sewing machine, fabrics and remnants of the family jewelry collection, that was all the valuables the girl had. Obeying her inner fear, Emma checked the stash. A pair of antique earrings and a ring were there. The girl calmed down a little, but the next morning she took the jewelry and went to the bank to put it in a safe deposit box. There was no guarantee that Jake hadn't taken care of the duplicate key. Besides, Caroline could have done that too. After her visit to the bank, she planned to call a locksmith to change the lock, just in case. So, having signed a contract for a safe deposit box and placed the jewelry there, she decided to withdraw the accumulated interest from the account so that she could have cash on hand. However, an employee of the financial institution shocked Emma with the news. "I'm sorry, but under your power of attorney, all the funds were withdrawn from the account yesterday," she said. Emma tried not to shout. Emma clarified. "Tell me, and who did I give the power of attorney to? Can you look at it?" The employee did not refuse the strange client and gave a name Emma had never expected to hear. It wasn't Jake who'd taken the money from the account, as she'd assumed, but her ex-best friend. She thanked the operator, who asked her if everything was all right, and wandered home. It was clear as day that Caroline was the one who could have so accurately guided Jake about her likes and dislikes. Not only did her friend know the naive Emma, it was at her behest and at her instruction that the man had managed to present himself in the image of the ideal. She believed in the incredible harmony and love at first sight. Now there was an explanation, and the fact that Caroline had pressed her pity, cursing her loneliness, was also part of the plan. Surely when they'd invited her to the wedding, the traitors must have been up to something devious, too. Maybe someone would be brought in to raid the flat while Emma, swallowing tears, would give them words of congratulations. After all, her friend knew for a fact that she still had her jewelry. Only she'd never told her where the stash was located in the house. Emma did not go to the police about the theft of money, because technically Caroline had a power of attorney, and there was no doubt that it was signed by a real signature. The foreman replaced the lock in the door, and the girl felt a little calmer. She couldn't relax completely, however. Emma decided to use the insomnia to her advantage. She began to think about an outfit to make a spectacular appearance at the wedding of the people who had betrayed her trust. Barely having waited for working hours, the girl appeared in the office of the agency secret. Following the clues of the guard sitting near the turnstile, she found the door, on which hung a sign with the name of a recent acquaintance, and knocked. Entered. Before Sam could tell the girl the information she'd gleaned, she confessed. "You know, I guess you were right. Jake was briefed by my best friend. She took money out of my account by proxy, by the way. But it was my fault. I signed every piece of paper my fiancé gave me. It's my fault." Sam confirmed it. "Yeah, I managed to talk to Caroline's cousin, Ben. He's probably the most innocent element in this scheme. In my opinion, he was used as a front. He's a big guy, and his main job was to scare the guy who said he was your grandfather." Catching the surprise on Emma's face, Sam explained. "It was a well-thought-out production. I understand Caroline knew the basic information about your family. Jake found an actor to play Mr. John Smith. You'd only seen old photographs of your grandfather when he was young, so there was no fear of exposure. The crooks wanted to get rich, and as I understand it, they almost succeeded. I think they didn't invite you to the wedding just to make fun of you, but with the same vested interest. After all, you caught them unexpectedly, and he just didn't have time to bring the search of your flat to its logical conclusion." Emma nodded. "I've come to roughly the same conclusion. I just have a few questions bouncing around in my head. Why did my best friend, who was there for me in my most difficult moments, suddenly decide to betray me? Why would she do that to me? It's not like we've never even had a serious fight." Sam surmised. Maybe jealousy or greed? Those are usually the main motives behind most crimes. Emma's face even stretched a little in surprise. My family wasn't much richer than Caroline's originally, so it's definitely not greed. And as for jealousy, it wasn't me she was jealous of, it was my friend I was jealous of. Ever since my parents had died, I'd been crazy to imagine that Caroline could play checkers with her dad, hug her mum, and talk to her in confidence. I was overcome with envy. What can I say? I still have that feeling now. Maybe she's getting back at me for my envy. I don't think so. Anyway, I don't know what to think. I'm in a lot of pain right now with everything that's going on. I know one thing for sure, I'm going to the wedding of those traitors. If only so that I can look at Jake and Caroline and see why they did such a despicable thing to me. The assistant detective explained. Jake's motives are pretty clear. He was driven by greed. He's got so much debt in his hometown, he's got a lot of debt to pay. He's a mediocre lawyer, but his demands are such that he can't afford the average fees. He also had addictions. He got out of town by swindling several ladies out of large sums of money. Promised marriage. He took money under plausible pretenses and quarrels. He was treated at a private clinic in our area. Gave the doctors almost everything he had from his naive country women for his rehabilitation. Now he's back on the hunt for riches. Do not worry. We will definitely try to get you back in the dance studio and the money. But in the meantime, don't make a fuss, or Jake and Caroline might just run away. And I want them to be punished fairly. Emma began to thank the man, and Sam sighed. I've been able to find so much information on Jake these days. It's amazing. I mean, he's not stupid enough to do anything dishonest. He's a real master, but he's probably overconfident. You want me to tell you all the tricks he's pulled in this town right now? Or better wait. And then at the wedding you'll see everything. Although Emma had a desire to know everything at once, she, after a little thought, answered, I think I'll wait. I don't feel like getting deeper into the mud right now. I've had enough of what I've learned so far. There are only two problems left: what to wear and who to go with. I'm working on the first one, but I don't know what to do about the second. Sam, why don't you keep me company? Don't think I'll pay for the escort, because that's a separate job. The man shook his head negatively. No, I'm not fit for a spectacular appearance. My appearance is ordinary, unremarkable, and, to be honest, even mediocre. But you come with me on your arm, and what? Only at the first moment your detractors will feel pleasure. They'll say they couldn't persuade anyone better. If you're going to make a spectacular appearance, you have to deal them a crushing blow, so that they'll be in a bad mood. Listen, I think I know just the man for you. If it works out, it'll be amazing. And if it doesn't, I'll keep you company, of course. It may not be the most glamorous exit, but I'll give you some amazing information. Emma agreed with Sam that they would meet half an hour before the wedding and agreed on the place. Saying goodbye, the girl went to the needlework shop to buy fittings for her planned outfit. She had only 2 weeks left to create a stunning dress. Not the shortest of deadlines, but the idea wasn't too simple either. Emma was nervous and stabbed her fingers with a needle several times until they bled. In order not to cry from resentment and pain, the girl remembered her grandmother's words that by omen a thing sown with such incidents will definitely turn out perfect. The girl did not have to rush to work, and she missed her classes. But she wasn't going to go to Caroline's house and ask to go back. Emma was warmed by the thought that it was likely that the studio would soon be in her possession again, though her gullibility had already failed her. The girl trusted Sam to be honest with her. On the day of Jake and Caroline's wedding, Emma had looked truly dazzling. She looked like a tongue of flame with both color and vague associations. The top of the dress had a daring asymmetrical neckline, and the flared skirt with high slits at the seams fluttered playfully as she walked, revealing nothing too much, but perfectly arousing her imagination. Emma knew she was irresistible in that dress, but Sam's praise pleased her. She realized from his plain clothes that her companion would be someone else, and was incredibly surprised when the man who had once tried to pass himself off as her grandfather approached her, the detective's assistant. He embarrassingly introduced himself. Mr. Brown is an unemployed provincial theater actor, but necessity forced him to play the role of a con man in the hope of being trusted. Pardon my deception if you can. Emma's heart was pounding as before an important performance, but she pulled herself together. She took Mr. Brown under her arm and walked with him towards the restaurant rented from the businessman. At the entrance, they were suddenly met by Caroline's parents, who greeted their daughter's friend very warmly and regarded her companion with undisguised interest. The bride's mum cordially invited. "Oh, Emma, how glad I am that you have come. Come in. Almost everyone is already gathered there. Have fun, relax, be happy for Caroline and her fiancé. Such a fine man. I hope you get lucky one day. You deserve it." Emma was having a hard time with this conversation, and as if sensing it, her companion squeezed her hand a little harder. Caroline's father admired the way his daughter's friend looked, being rewarded with a disgruntled look from his wife, who dragged him along. "Have you forgotten where the steward has directed us? Come quickly, I'll see you, Emma." The woman spoke almost at a run, dragging her husband after her. As Emma and Mr. Brown crossed the threshold of the banqueting hall, she was pleased to note that Caroline and Jake had frozen like statues when they saw the guests. The bride and groom didn't look happy at all. With some control over their emotions, they waved to Emma and her companion. Caroline reached for the groom's ear. "What's that drunk doing here? You told me he'd get the money he's owed and drive off where no one could find him." Jake put his arm around his fiancée, pulled her close, and replied, "I don't think Emma has anything serious planned against us. It's just someone who looks like her. She has a good visual memory. She may have guessed that Grandpa showed up on her doorstep not by accident, but so I could get to her quickly and without suspicion. So she decided to annoy us, to demoralize us, to poison the joy of our happy day. She thought about it, recalled what this supposed Mr. John Smith looked like, and hired someone. There are plenty of actors in the country dreaming of an easy way to make money. So relax, Caroline." Emma and her companion tried to act as if nothing had happened and not to stand out from the rest of the guests in any way, neither by being overjoyed nor by frowning. Thanks to the lady hostess, they found their table almost instantly and sat down, waiting for the start of the party, which promised to be very special. Emma was pleased to note how anxiously Caroline was looking at her. And meeting her gaze, she smiled as sweetly as possible. She had no idea what kind of surprise Sam had prepared, but she was excited. At a signal from the hostess, Caroline's parents brought a huge loaf into the banquet hall, and the fun began in full swing. The guests congratulated the newlyweds. The bride's parents sang a duet song. The aunt on the groom's side organized a long presentation of small souvenirs to rhyme. Emma was getting more and more worried, but Mr. Brown reassured her, and when the steward announced it was their turn to congratulate the newlyweds, the man whispered quietly, "Well, Emma, here we go. Let me do the talking, and you listen and be glad you learned about the real nature of your ex-fiancé in time." Caroline coughed with excitement, and Emma's companion, carefully supporting her, took a seat in the middle of the hall. The experienced actor didn't even need a microphone. His well-pitched voice, which surprisingly had not lost its sonority after years of libations, was heard in all corners of the hall. "So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brown addressed the audience. I suggest we turn our attention to the screen." The hostess switched off several rows of lamps and the room became much darker. Suddenly, to the sound of Mendelssohn's March, racy images of the groom with other women began to appear on the screen. Mr. Brown accompanied the changing images with brief information about the names of the groom's lovers. When Jake came to his senses, he tried to shout out the unexpected guest and convince everyone else that the image on the screen was a photo montage. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Caroline seemed to be completely unaware of her fiancé's amorous nature, and after the photo of Jake and Emma's company had been followed by shots of her, and the unusual film continued with other ladies, she slapped her fiancé and shouted at him, unashamedly, "Gad, you said you only cheated Emma. We're going to live happily ever after. You got me to help you take her dance studio away from her. And he's only hooking me up for profit. I should have known better than to follow you. You decided to get married. And then what were your plans? Run away with the money you gave me, take my business away from me too. I hate you." Finally, Jake's display of unfaithfulness was over. The lights came back on, and Sam Swan entered the room, escorted by police officers. Unfortunately, the festivities will have to come to an end, he explained. The main celebrants are suspected of fraud. Caroline's parents rushed to the law enforcement officers to explain that there had been a mistake. But the police were adamant. Jake and Caroline were handcuffed and led to the exit. As the ex-girlfriend approached Emma, the girl asked her a question. "Why did you do this to me?" "I always thought you were someone I could trust." Caroline braced herself and blurted out, "You always got everything without a problem. First places, inheritances, even the students gravitated towards you, not me." Emma was shocked. She was trying to figure out if Caroline was being sincere, if she had almost ruined her life out of jealousy, just as Sam had suggested. Caroline spat angrily and confessed, "You've always been the best. Ever since sports camp, and I've been a pale shadow of you. You know what I'm going to tell you? I hate you. Ever since I saw you dancing. If you must know, I'm the one who tried to ruin your performance. I'm the reason the music stopped playing during your dance. But things turned out in your favor." Caroline paid no attention to anyone around her and, looking into Emma's eyes, reported, "The only moments I've ever been truly happy, you know what they were." Emma remained silent, afraid to even speculate, and Caroline grinned crookedly, continuing, "I was ready to jump for joy when you were suffering. How hard it was to hide your joy, to feign sympathy." A distraught Caroline tried to throw herself at Emma, but it wasn't easy to do so in handcuffs. The cops led the detainee away. Emma remained standing in the middle of the hall. She had yet to come face to face with her ex-fiancé, but he passed her by, barely glancing at her cleavage. "Jake, aren't you ashamed?" Emma asked after him. But the man didn't even turn round. "There's no shame in people like that," Sam Swan said loudly. At the request of Caroline's parents, Emma did not claim the money she had withdrawn from the account, but invested the compensation she had received in the development of her network of dance studios. For her, the situation with her ex-girlfriend and ex-fiancé was a great life lesson, and she was distrustful of the idea of dating, which was expressed by Sam. It took the assistant private detective about 3 years for Emma to finally believe in the sincerity of his feelings. A millionaire widower hired an orphaned orphan as a carer for his daughter, and once home early P4. Amanda was experiencing the very real state of dread of a clean slate, even though she was neither a writer nor a journalist. Tomorrow she was starting a new life and a new job with accommodation. The employer is a wealthy, powerful businessman who clearly doesn't know his capital account. Without further ado, he made his conditions to her over the phone. "I need a carer with a degree in psychotherapy to be near my daughter 24 hours a day. I have a comfortable country house with excellent living conditions. You will be completely comfortable, but for the 3 months of your probationary period, you will not get a single day off. A generous salary will compensate you for this temporary inconvenience." And the man, who called himself Carl, quoted her fee so much that Amanda's legs gave out. Her monthly income would be the equivalent of her hospital salary for the year with all bonuses and fringe benefits. They agreed that she would start her duties in 3 days. During this time, she would gather all the personal belongings she needed and select the necessary medical devices for the patient's sessions. She will then be authorized to make a list of anything else she may need in her work. A car will pick you up at your front door at 0808 00 hours sharp. The driver's name is Andrew. Send me your home address to this number. Carl pronounced the words sharply and clearly as if he were minting coins. Amanda even thought that every minute of this man apparently is worth both silver and gold. Too businesslike. But it even appealed to her. She didn't respect the sourness and gruel in his speeches. She judged people by their actions, not by their sweet-voiced promises. She knew in her 26 years that time puts everything in its place and stigmatizes characters. Who's worth what? Here she is, Amanda herself, a psychotherapist with a red diploma, the beauty and pride of the faculty, the hope of the department. At school, all lightweight and character girlfriends on discos and bars and high school fluttered, she crammed. A place in the medical university on the budget partially guaranteed only a gold medal. The support should have been passed on excellent final exams. There was no money for serious education in the family of Max, a plumber, and his wife Idokshka, who worked in a bakery as a saleswoman. No, her parents were not some marginalized individuals. Father even drank, only on holidays, did not complain of this bad habit, and with men colleagues every paycheck did not cheat. He came from a remote, abandoned village and ended up in the city when clever businessmen bought out all the agriculture in his small homeland for the farming kingdom. A kind of holding there now appeared with dairy and meat processing plant of a new format, with technological lines of the most innovative kind. Max was called to work there, but he held a grudge against the new owners, that they almost uprooted the pogost on the outskirts, where his and his wife Ida's parents were buried, that the village was torn down to nothing, turned into ashes, ruins, an archaeological monument of their former life. Inwardly, he knew it was just as well. The population in their village was finally getting drunk. There was no work. Everyone was leaving for the city in droves. Only he and Ida held on to their hut and 10 acres of land, but then they gave up too. Amandochka was 14 years old at that time. That's how she became a city girl. With the proceeds from the sale of land and house, they bought a 2-room flat in the city. The 5-story red brick building was strong. It would stand for a long time. Max was taken to the factory with open arms. The salary was small, but their family made ends meet. Ida quickly made friends with the women neighbors. They told her there was room in the bakery. The old saleswoman had just taken a well-deserved holiday. Working Ida was well received, not offended. Happiness ended overnight. Max came to pick up his wife from the bakery in an old car. Clumsy bread van, in the courtyard, clumsily turned around, crushed under himself a kopeck, not even immediately noticing what happened fate. The driver and passenger died on the spot. Amanda's urban life began with orphanhood. Amanda used to rush to school like a prodigy. Always loved to learn, books about relationships between people so in general swallowed overnight. So she was interested in who and how of the heroes will act when he tail-nailed, in a stalemate plunged into a stalemate with all the guts, in front of the choice put. And in the orphanage, where she got after the tragedy, at first snickered, but then sublimated on the study, not to think, not to remember untimely departed loved ones. 6 months later, her foster parents took her under guardianship, but warm, cordial relations with them were not born. She moved to them in 2 rooms and a communal room, still not an orphanage, where everyone dreamed of a family and parents even at a young age, but she dreamed of growing up and living alone. Naive, touching young lady Amanda tried to assess the behavior of people, to guess who and how they would show themselves, taking into account their temperament and character, a kind of homegrown psychologist. And even more, she liked to think about the fact that a person can be broken, to change the line of his behavior, to convince. In the 10th grade, Amanda disappeared in the scientific library, where she read Freud, Jung, Bandura, Halperin, Beck, Bechterew. Her classmates did not know the names of such names, and she melted and molted from her new discoveries. Her gold medal at school suffered, sitting days and nights on her heels over textbooks. Her merits did not include gifts, offerings to teachers there was no one to pay. Talented student high marks were given sincerely and generously. Her peers did not persecute the crazy girl. They had long since given up on her eccentricities, although there were good reasons to pay more attention to her. Amanda was ravishingly beautiful, possessing that very feminine magic when men turn into slaves, admirers, barely having seen such a rare specimen of external perfection. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, fell in waves down her smooth back. Green eyes with dark pupils beckoned to drown in their depths. Lush forms gave birth to a halo of sensuality. Graceful wrists and ankles hinted at blue blood, charm, aristocratism, refinement. Nature had not rested on her appearance. Only Amanda herself did not seem to notice any of this, persistently gnawed the granite of science and ignored the languid glances of representatives of the stronger sex of all ages. After receiving a certificate of secondary education, orphan, and even a medalist in the medical university, took pity. Dramatic life at the girl, you can make an exception, on the budget place to look for a place. She passed the entrance exam on excellent without tutors and material investments. She returned to her flat, left after the death of her parents. Private property, nothing can be done or taken away. She dressed unfashionably, modestly. Not as a garden scarecrow, of course, adhered to strict classics. a little leveling her natural charm. She didn't notice men around her from the word at all. She was so keen on Mrs. Psychology. But one day she fell for a seasoned catcher. Mason was also good-looking, ironic, daring, and unpredictable with this Amanda and managed to captivate. She fell head over heels in love. She responded enthusiastically to the offer to drop by for a glass of wine, knowing perfectly well what would follow. Except the guy had a nasty little soul. Amanda laid in bed on a bet with a guy from the majors who was courting the girl, but got a turnaround. Told a fellow student, "Son, don't sit on the crate. I'll take this girl down without a hitch." He grinned, "And then you'll follow the beaten track." Got it, rookie. Don't teach a scientist, the golden child of an important daddy. If you get her to be easy for me, I'll slip you 100 grand. So Mason worked his arse off. Amanda figured out the catch the next time they met after their wild night. Her hot beau looked like an ice cube. She didn't faint. She wrote off her fascination with the smarmy Mason as hormones. Only the fee to the self-confident, handsome man did not get. Amanda made far-reaching conclusions for herself, and now she wouldn't let male representatives within a kilometer of her. Coffee with cakes in the nearest cafe between couples was always welcome. Going to the cinema for the premiere as a group. Why not? The rest of the attempts in her address, reminiscent of courtship, suppressed at the root. Around the crowd of those wishing only hoped in vain, all awaited a complete refusal. Trouble for the young doctor, after completing the theoretical course of classes, did not end there. Place in residency received deservedly, in a prestigious psychotherapeutic hospital. There greedily caught every word of her new idol, the head of the Department of Rehabilitation after serious cognitive disorders. He taught the resident a lot, eagerly listening to his recommendations. He handled difficult patients, then helped her with a referral to another prestigious place. And there the persecution from the male community continued. The first swallow, or rather a persistent eagle guest, was one of the doctors with professional weight in the clinic. He did not go round and round. He called the young specialist to his office. "We need to have dinner with you today to discuss the prospects of your work in our institution. Warn me at home that you won't come for the night." He told her directly, without any offense, straight to the forehead, that her career was only through his bed. She abruptly and without regret refused the invitation, for which she soon paid the price. It turned out that before her appearance in this institution with sedatives under strict control, everything was clear. Then she showed up, and expensive pills started going missing in packs. Her involvement or non-involvement in the thefts was not investigated. They quickly pointed at the door, threatening proceedings with a subsequent wolf ticket and blacklisting in the profession. The next incident occurred at the specialized ambulance station where she got a job. The brigades had a narrow focus: to take them out of a hangover, to deal with aggressive behavior that led to a fight, injury to loved ones, and a state of temporary effect. Their patients were people on the brink, balancing between the diagnosis of incompetent and incapacitated, living between bouts of mental illness and remission. Why weren't they isolated from society? There were plenty of reasons. Some where relatives ransomed the blood babies, and some where the border guards themselves were able to prey with the help of money and connections from suspicions of abnormality. Amanda had never realized there were such medical services in their city. She'd been brought here by the same call from a faculty member who'd patronized her during her residency. The trips to the inadequates, as her team called them, were over in a month. That time she was on the same team as the head of their office. He also sometimes took part in psychological raids, saying that he hadn't been to the circus for a long time and wanted to have fun. Amanda was disgusted by his cynicism, but had no choice. After a fairly quiet shift, the supervisor volunteered to give her a lift home. The institution was located outside the city. The first bus was still an hour away. Everyone was tired after a sleepless night. On her own head, the young woman agreed. But the chief didn't go to the city, but drove her to the nearest woods. "Bolly, I don't like ceremonies." He breathed in her face with his breath. He wasn't afraid of anything. When already in the car, he drank half of a flat glass flask of cognac. Amanda immediately wanted to leave the car, but he only laughed. "I have half of the city receive certificates of sanity in the right cases. I am not afraid of neither the authorities nor the traffic police." She herself could not explain later where the strength came from to slap him hard. The man's head jerked. He looked at his colleague in surprise. "Not cooperative, you say? Well, go fish out of here the field to the city 11 kilometers. While you walk, you will air your brains in the cold. There's no place in my team for a naughty girl. Ask any of our female employees. Now get out." Amanda didn't ask anyone. The next shift, she wrote a letter of resignation, and that was that. Out of practice again, out of work again. She stayed home for a month and a half. None of the clinics did not want to take her even to the place of a nurse. Rumors of her unreliability filled the medical world, and it was up to everyone to interpret them. Amanda's psychotherapist, advanced in matters of different types of aggression, was well aware of such a Western phenomenon as harassment, but the woman had never imagined that she herself would become its victim. She did not yet know how the owner of a bright female beauty to put up barriers against vile molestations, rudely violating her personal space. This was something she would have to think hard about in the future. A call from Carl the day before had interrupted a long string of bad luck. She wouldn't just go for the job, she'd crawl into it if she had to. Why was she so scared and excited at the same time? She couldn't explain it herself. "What will the coming day bring me?" she hummed for some reason in a bass voice, and then asked further, "Will I fall pierced by an arrow?" Then she would laugh loudly to drive the nasty fear further inwards. The job was ambiguous. A carer for a girl with a fatal blood disorder and Asperger's. The notorious syndrome was unfamiliar to ordinary people, far removed from medical terms. In a nutshell, its effect on patients could be characterized as inability, impossibility, or inclination to communicate with the outside world. Existence in their own narrow world into which strangers were rarely allowed. In society, such people are called autistic. The anamnesis of Amanda's future ward was aggravated by a serious blood disease, autoimmune in nature. Inside the unfortunate victim, some cells kept proving to others that they were the main ones, destroying the body tissues caught on the warpath. The patient's condition was now rated medium severity. Protracted remission gave her father a chance to be near his favorite girl longer. But how long the insidious disease will behave decently knew, in all probability, only the Almighty in heaven. The doctors only parted their hands. "Carl, we are doing everything we can, but only a miracle can help the girl. You and I live in the real world with its cruel laws of Mother Nature, ruling over all living beings on the planet." "I've heard it all 1,000 times, replied the inconsolable father. "What's your advice? How can I brighten her life if she does not react to anything unconcerned, inactive, quiet, and silent? I've never seen if she can smile. 16 years of constant uncertainty. It can drive you crazy." The renowned autism spectrum disorder specialist sitting in the chair across from Carl thought for a few seconds, then said, "I have one doctor with a not-so-successful professional path, doesn't get along for long in any treatment facility, and I can't get from her the reasons for these constant fiascos. She was one of the most intelligent students on my course, gave great hopes, burning desire to benefit disadvantaged people, followed all the methods and innovations in our field, and in clinics deflated like a balloon. Unfortunately, I cannot patronize every brilliant student of mine. Made a couple of patronages for her, but it didn't work out. She and I recently met by chance at a cake shop where I was buying a cake for my wife's birthday. Exchanged contacts in case I had information again about vacancies somewhere in our sponsored hospitals. Invite this girl, she did her residency at my hospital, and I can vouch for her almost as much as I can." Carl weighed the pros and cons and decided that he had nothing to lose. The old carers couldn't cope with Elizabeth. So maybe this young girl could do something? There were quite a few residents in his large house. His favorite cook, Vanessa, who had been with him for 30 years, her son Ashley, the gardener and Vanessa's au pair, a maid with the exotic name of Gabriella. There's room for the unknown Amanda, with 4 guest rooms empty. Baby, as he called the maid to himself. I'll have to give her the order to do it. The ice of the experiment that would turn their lives around had broken. Amanda decided to start the radical changes in her life with her appearance. She needed to create a new working image that would hide her natural beauty as much as possible. She didn't want this heavenly gift, which she thought was unnecessary and undeserved, to interfere with her work again. The young woman's not-so-extensive wardrobe consisted of loose trousers, baggy skirts in dark colors, oversized jumpers, blouses, low-cut shoes, and boots. A couple of funny pajamas with Chibarashka and Gina and bunnies on the lawn on the prints. Amanda liked lingerie, lace, and silk, so no one would see it under her loose clothes. Her hair was a bit of a mess. They did not want to be braided into braids, which were destined to form a curl on her head. The image was completed by glasses with neutral glasses without diopters. She had bought them for a masquerade party at the university a long time ago. Now they came in handy again. Satisfied with the fitting, Amanda put her camouflage ammunition into a large bag and went to collect her specialized books with much more pleasure. While her patient was resting, she would read everything about autism in more detail. You don't just start treatment from scratch. You need a sober, rational approach to everything. At 08:00 this morning, as promised by Carl, Amanda's doorbell rang with a smiling guy. "Hi, I'm Andrew. Let me take your things to the car. The chief has asked you to check everything thoroughly for any forgotten items. You won't be able to leave for 3 months." Amanda felt so warm and relaxed by his words, she thought we'd work together. I'll do everything I can to make it work. The journey to her new home took just over 3 hours without traffic. The train station is 2 kilometers away. As if Andrew had read her mute question. There are 6 cars in the garage, 2 drivers. Anything that needs to be bought and brought in, you'll leave it to me. Amanda looked curiously around the majestic, but very pretty house of gentle sandy color with brown original elements of decor on the facade, balconies, a large terrace. The building stood surrounded by parkland, with a large outdoor swimming pool visible in the distance, now covered with some kind of protective material. The smooth alleys were lined with neat, clean tiles, a scattering of coniferous trees. One of the paths was framed with birch trees. The rose garden was wrapped in a film. On the other side of the house there are some outbuildings resembling small greenhouses. Everywhere boxwood shrubbery, green even in this late autumn, some exotic, with thick emerald-colored leaves. There's a whole guard lined up on the porch. "Welcome to our home." These are the words of a tall, formidable woman with a mop of bright red hair. "My name is Vanessa. I'm the housekeeper, like Carlson's freaking Bach, and I'm also the cook." The woman smiled a wide, kind smile and held out a large, soft, warm palm to Amanda. "This fellow with the rake is my son Ashley. He's a bit of a handyman out of boredom, but his favorite is the garden. It's his domain," Aunt Vanessa continued. "Have you met Andrew? The other driver's name is William. The only one left is our maid Gabriela. Her mom's Spanish. That's where the name came from." Amanda was stared at with 2 large brown eyes by a young lady with a form that was overemphasized by her work clothes. Amanda only had time to think when a tall, elderly man with a noble appearance appeared on the doorstep. She would have addressed him as Your Majesty, or at least Your Grace or Your Lordship before. Gray, piercing eyes, a short hedgehog of gray hair, regal posture, broad shoulders, pleasant timbre of voice. "Amanda, I am Carl. Gabriela will show you to your room and give you a tour of the house and courtyard. Make yourself comfortable. Our Vanessa will bring the meal schedule to your attention. I expect you in my office in 2 hours for a chat. If it satisfies me, I'll introduce you to my daughter Elizabeth." He turned and disappeared into the house. Ashley picked up Amanda's luggage. Gabriela made an inviting gesture to follow her, and only Vanessa smiled reassuringly at her. "We have lunch at 2 p.m. Late arrivals will not be tolerated by the host. Then we'll get to know each other better. Now you have more important things to do without me." Amanda followed Gabriela through the house and hardly listened to the maid's peaceful mutterings. She was impressed by her room, with its separate bathroom and toilet, its huge windows overlooking the garden, its elegant yet homely atmosphere. She did not know yet how her life in this house would turn out, but she was already eager to make herself useful in it. Amanda's relationship with her foster parents was normal, but whether it was modern trends that influenced them, or whether her interests were very different from those of the older generation. They rarely saw each other. Communication was reduced to routine phone calls like, "Daughter, how are you? Is everything all right? Everything is fine with us, too. The dialogue usually ended or was reduced to discussing another talk show on TV or gossip about the neighbors in the yard. It was stifling for Amanda in such a boring framework. To see each other was for her birthday, to drop by with presents before New Year's Eve, but to tell her father and mother how difficult and lonely it was for her in this world of people was out of the question. She's an adult, independent, a cut-off piece. She had not formed with her guardians that special soulful closeness, when one for all and all for one. The older generation did not understand her choice of profession, but moving to a flat, leaving on her own approved. Adopted daughters stopped chasing them for the empty time spent near the TV in the arms of fried seeds, without attempts to develop intelligence. Different blood, different destinies, on different paths rushing. This large, beautiful dwelling Amanda felt in her gut some kind of unity between the household. She had not been here for half an hour yet, and she already wanted to stay for a long time. Tired of the long monologue, Gabriella led her to the door of Carl's study at the end of her tour of the building and garden and said, "I don't like ceremonies and antimonies. We'll be rubbing our sides against each other all day long. Don't barge in on your master. Knock first. He doesn't take kindly to familiarity." Amanda nodded, agreeing to the you and thanking her for the tips. Gabriella left, swaying her hips gently, and the therapist thought to herself, "There's a reason this nymph is trying so hard. Probably there is an object of her attention in the house, for the sake of which she is constantly in a state of combat readiness to beckon, to envelope with charms, to conquer the heart. Does she have her eye on the master? It's a good thing I took care of my modest appearance beforehand. I will not be so conspicuous to the domestic public as Gabriella deliberately does. They'll have to deal with that themselves. I have other tasks." Amanda knocked firmly on the study door and entered after a shout from her host. Yes, come in, I'm in my office." The office, though still an inexperienced practitioner, but a very strong theorist, liked it at first sight. Furniture made of noble wood, endless shelves with books, elegant statuettes, excellent landscapes and stylish frames on the walls. A desk with a large desktop computer, a music center with speakers in a corner, a separate cabinet with CDs. She didn't know Carl at all yet, but this office seemed to shout out loud, "My owner is far from stupid, well-read and educated, intelligent and successful." Carl himself invited her to sit in the soft armchair by the coffee table, not telling her her subordinate place in the room, seating her at the desk opposite him. Ringing the bell, he summoned Gabriella. "Make us a couple of cups of coffee, please, or would you prefer juice or tea?" Amanda gratefully agreed to the coffee. She had been so nervous this morning that she hadn't even had breakfast at home, and now she was afraid that her traitorous stomach would give her away, rumbling loudly at the worst possible moment. Lucky for her, along with coffee, Gabriella had brought a vase of walnut biscuits, a box of chocolates, and a jug of cream. Amanda pounced on the treats like a hungry wolf, but she saw no judgment in Carl's eyes. He liked sincerity and directness in people, even smiled. "We're not welcoming you well. Your first day on the road. They didn't even offer you tea." Amanda tried to say with a full mouth that everything was fine, then smiled helplessly back, wiped the crumbs off her lips, and carefully finished the rest of the biscuits. "You'll have to forgive me. I was nervous, so I went for the sweets. Thanks for the coffee. Let's get back to business." Carl would never admit to his partners or to this young woman that he likes to do his inspections the old-fashioned way. It was an approach he had borrowed from his father, a simple farmer who had spent his life cultivating the land and growing cereal crops. Now his father, unfortunately, was no longer able to work. 5 years ago, Carl had bought a house in the neighboring village where his parents were now living. The older generation flatly refused to move into Carl's mansion, arguing that the land in their vegetable garden was much closer and more interesting to them than the park landscapes of their son's estate. Having a kind-hearted housekeeper, the son stopped persuading them to live together. Now they only went to visit each other and to family holidays. But he remembered his father's instruction that any hired laborer should first be fed heartily, see how he copes with the meal, and then draw conclusions. If a person eats sincerely, without greediness and false shyness, he will be good, but if he tells that he is not hungry, Takes only a couple of crumbs from the table for decency. He will work so sluggishly. Any qualified recruiter would die with laughter from such a method of personnel selection, but Carl had long ago learnt from his own experience that the method works without fail. After handing Gabriella a tray with empty cups, Amanda's boss started the conversation. "Your candidacy was recommended to me by a professor who sometimes counsels my daughter. Before you begin your duties, I would like to briefly tell you our backstory. Not as a stranger to me yet, but as a therapist. Elizabeth, my wife, and I have a late baby. My spouse passed away a week after she was born. Heart failure. I have an older son, Harry. He lives and works in Europe, in our branch in Prague, and comes here occasionally. Harry was born when my wife and I were very young. Now he is 33 years old. Our student marriage, made by great mutual love, turned out to be very strong. We live soul to soul, and only one thing upset my chosen one. After the birth of Harry, a series of miscarriages followed. My wife dreamed of a second child, a girl. Even the name of her beforehand in honor of her mother, to whom my wife was infinitely attached. At the age of 44, my wife got pregnant once again. Was infinitely happy, but the doctors grabbed their heads. Even the usual examination, which all expectant mothers undergo, revealed a serious arrhythmia. The heart could not cope with the double load. Problems with the work of blood vessels began. Doctors feared that the baby was not getting enough of the nutrients it needed. My wife, almost all the time lying in the clinic, only looked at me pleadingly and asked, "Don't let the doctors terminate this pregnancy. I will take care, fulfill all their appointments. I have to carry this baby to term." Her zeal increased even more after the ultrasound showed that she was carrying a girl. The wife became finally obsessed with the idea that it was heaven that finally took pity on us and was giving us this last chance. My wife bravely endured 9 months of agonizing waiting and an endless series of procedures and injections and surgical intervention in the form of a cesarean section. The neonatologist's verdict was a blow to her. They immediately began to suspect some abnormalities in the girl. A detailed examination showed that she inherited an extremely rare genetic blood disease, transmitted through the female line. People with it do not live long, 10 to 15 years at most. The news broke the wife, shattered everything in her already sick heart. Arrhythmia attacks began to recur with wicked persistence. She never returned home from the hospital. Elizabeth was discharged after 2 months of scrupulous observation. At first I was desperate, resentful of the little girl for taking away the woman I loved and leaving me alone in the world. Harry was 17 at that time. I am still amazed that he was a wise adult even then, convinced me that everything was destined by fate, that he too had lost his mum. But it was her life, her dream, and her choice. You won't believe it, but it was he who, together with the nanny, looked after the baby, quickly learned to change her nappies, and feed her specialized formula. The second blow was that soon doctors noticed that Elizabeth was different, not like other children. Her genetic disorder had not yet manifested itself in any way. But she drove us crazy by the fact that she did not react to our presence at 6 months, at 1 year and then. Imagine the picture. The child eats, sleeps, but does not react to us, to a lot of colorful toys around him. The face is like a frozen mask. No vivid facial expressions, no gestures. As you sit or lay down in such a position and will freeze. Sometimes for quite a long time. The girl turned out to be pretty, even pretty. Big-eyed, curls of blonde hair, chubby arms and legs, but she behaved like a puppet, like an artificial doll. After a while, she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome or autism. Doctors assured her that this type of autism spectrum disorder boded well for her prospects. Body functions would be partially developed, but not fully developed. I took Elizabeth to Europe. There the doctors were able to perform almost a miracle. They removed the sleep disorder, adapted her eating to the right regime, and taught her to react at least a little to what was going on. I came back from Germany almost happy. Elizabeth began to recognize her family, babbled something in a language we didn't know, sometimes tried to express something with gestures, but she still hadn't learned to smile. On the street, she turned round at the noise during walks, on a trip to the Black Sea, and pushed her legs up when Harry and I tried to bathe her in it. A little later, I sent Harry to study in the UK. And as if as a reward for my troubles, my business grew and grew like on yeast, bringing me more and more income. We built this house together with my wife. It was her idea to live away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the peaceful countryside. The man briefly interrupted his narrative. It was obvious that the story stirred up old memories in him. He looked at his watch and then looked up a little. There are only 15 minutes left till lunch. The rest you will learn in the process of work. I'll just add the main thing, the autoimmune disease, like a hungry hydra on the hunt, reared its head sharply when Elizabeth entered puberty. Everything was always delayed compared to her peers. So it happened about 2 years ago, at her 14. The former merits of the medical profession began to fade quickly. It seemed that the destruction of cell tissue by her own internal aggressors was causing her brain activity to go to sleep. The few dozen words that she had previously spoken cheerfully were forgotten. She is once again indifferent to what is going on around her. Happy to walk with Vanessa outdoors, even swimming in the pool with Ashley's help, the girl has forgotten all those skills. More and more often she won't let herself get out of bed. Now moves only in a wheelchair, eats almost nothing, loses weight. I realize, Amanda, that you're not a miracle worker or a god. The doctors have already told me that the girl has no more than a year to live. The deterioration of her fragile body is progressing. For myself, I have labeled your tasks as facilitating her departure to the next world. I know it's impossible, but I still dream of her smiling when she looks at our park, our home, the sky and the sun. I guess I want too much from you. Amanda was in shock. No, not at the task set before her. Here she would do everything she could, apply all her knowledge. There was such pain and despair in the man's eyes. He spoke so courageously about his daughter's imminent departure from this world that the visiting therapist's blood ran cold. So much for the high fence, the rich house, in the walls of which for so many years trouble has lived at ease, despite the pleasant faces of the people who built it. The lunch was gorgeous. Vanessa cooked so deliciously that Amanda didn't even notice that she ate all of it. She reached for some very unusual salad, and several people answered her mute question about where Elizabeth was. Elizabeth is having lunch in her room, said Carl. We'll go to meet her after dinner. I've already made her favorite meatballs and mashed potatoes, Vanessa added. And I picked a bunch of brightly colored Septembers behind the house. I think Elizabeth is excited by their sharp autumn scent. Only Gaby, Elizabeth's father, had called the maid that once in a conversation in the study, and Amanda had picked up the nickname mentally, so shorter and much simpler, ate, staring intently at her plate. She seemed to care the least, if at all, about Elizabeth's plight. We'll have to keep an eye on this smashing person, Amanda decided to herself. She's prepared my room perfectly, no complaints. But did she make any insinuations about her patient? In dealing with an autistic patient, all means are good, and all little things can be global. After these words, everyone at the table was again distracted by sweet cakes and compote. Amanda thought to herself through her grief, dreams and thoughts. It's good here they have a soul. The servants dine at the same table with the master. Everyone is praying for the girl as best they can, all trying to brighten her life. Her thoughts were interrupted by Carl's voice. Amanda, are you ready to see your patient? The woman replied enthusiastically that she was looking forward to it, and she was not the least bit wrong. The curtains were drawn in Elizabeth's room. It was dark, and there was a kind of gloom and despair. Amanda immediately noted to herself that this had to change. It was understandable. A seriously ill person lived here, but it was not worth emphasizing it with decorations. The girl did not react to their appearance. At that moment, Vanessa brought a tray with Amanda's favorite dishes. The therapist decided not to put her work on hold. Carl, Vanessa, let me feed Elizabeth, and we'll have a chat. Leave us alone. Elizabeth is your new doctor, Amanda. She'll be with you almost non-stop. You don't mind if we leave you two alone, do you? Again, there was no visible reaction. The girl obediently opened her mouth at the sight of food, chewing and swallowing like a puppet. But Amanda began her monologue. I'm not a doctor or a carer for you, Elizabeth. I prefer the status of friend. I'll be there for you of my own free will, Even though I'm an employee, I'll tell you the truth, I'd stay with you for free, as long as I like it very much. Your wonderful house, the place, the people, you. Tomorrow you and I are going to turn your room upside down. I don't think it will be bad for your health." For a split second, Amanda thought there was a flicker of something in the girl's eyes, some glimmer of reaction, but it all went out again very quickly, and it could have been the insidious play of light and shadow in the room at all. The doctor, under a shower, decided to think about it in her room later, but in the meantime she dressed her ward in warm clothes and took her in her pram to the courtyard to breathe the strong air of golden autumn. From that moment on, the days in the house followed a long-established pattern. And in the morning, Amanda and Elizabeth had breakfast together in the girl's room. Then there were the inevitable drips and injections to combat the manifestations of genetic malfunctions. The obligatory 2-hour walk in the garden, where Ashley always lovingly tended the plants. Lunch in the great hall. At this meal, Amanda would spend time with the household and then feed Elizabeth. The patient's therapeutic sleep, a new batch of medication dripping steadily through the IV for a couple of hours at a time. Dinner, now in the presence of Carl, who on weekdays was always at work, and in the evenings and weekends worked hard at home in his office. Exhausted by the endless procedures, the patient fell into a deep sleep as early as 10 o'clock in the evening. Amanda studied the works of colleagues related to autism again and again. There were no changes in terms of closer contact with her ward, neither for the worse nor for the better. The girl's condition remained stable. Amanda talked to Elizabeth about everything, told her about the plot of her favorite fiction books, read her poems, showed her reproductions of paintings from a large, colorful album. Or rather, the word talking is not appropriate here at all. The doctor conducted her eternal monologue, and the girl listened to it indifferently. The other day, already beginning to despair, a little doctor found in one of the foreign articles information that to level the manifestations of isolation with autism for patients can be a good help to communicate with the animal world. For some reason, there were no pets in Carl's house. After a general meeting of all the residents of the mansion, it was decided to get a puppy of a large dog. Most of all, for some reason, everyone liked a Canadian Newfoundland. 2 days later, Andrew brought a shaggy black treasure with stormy eyes from a kennel breeding this particular breed. He was irresistible. It is commonly believed that our lesser brothers have no intelligence. What told Tim, then, that the full name Timothy, and not some Bax or Lord, was so much nicer, that he was meant for Elizabeth. Finding himself in her room as a guest, the place had long since been on Amanda's errand, a more racy setting with lots of brightly colored elements. Tim headed straight for the girl and rubbed his wet nose into her palm. The doctor was sure there was a flicker of reaction in Elizabeth's eyes, lightning fast, but she had no doubt, bright and positive. For the first time, Amanda felt they were on the right track. By New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone in the house was expecting Harry from Prague. Amanda didn't know the young man. She only remembered Vanessa's words. "He's golden." Elizabeth transforms when her big brother arrives. She can't smile, but here it's like her face lights up. Gabriella, who was present during their conversation, added, "And what a handsome man Harry is. Respectable, decent, wise, but at the same time outwardly a typical example of Hollywood hero lover. 2 characters in one person, it's so intriguing." Vanessa immediately echoed her words. "Oof, Gabriella, go change Elizabeth's bedclothes, while she and Amanda are out for a walk. You've got Cupid's days on your mind, you're not the right girl. Roll your lips." Gaby, wiggling her hips as usual, walked away, and the cook gave her a shrug and said to Amanda, "The girl goes completely off the rails when the owner's son flies home from Europe, making eyes at him, and he looks at her like she's nothing. He had a bride, but she cheated on her husband while he was earning money in the Czech Republic. They ran away, although the foolish young lady was begging us, shedding tears, just that the hair on her head did not tear in despair that she missed a rich party. It didn't help. Harry couldn't trust her at all, couldn't forgive her for seeing another man at the same time." Sighing sorrowfully, Vanessa suddenly suggested, "Come to my room tonight and we'll have a tea party. I'll tell you my story, how Carl saved me from trouble, and why I've since nicknamed him the Angel of Goodness." On the walk, Amanda and Ashley discussed raising a new pet. It wasn't right for a pedigree dog to go pear-shucking in the yard. The gardener had told her he'd always wanted a dog. He patiently put up with Tim's antics, even forgave him for ramming a rose bush wrapped in cling film into the yard on the run. Amanda again thought that Elizabeth, sitting in the wheelchair, made some movement in the direction of the mischievous Newfoundlander, but she was in no hurry to express her assumptions aloud. We must watch and watch and watch again and again. There it would be seen. After supper, when she was satisfied that Elizabeth had fallen into a restful sleep, she closed her door firmly and knocked on the next door. "Come in. I've been waiting. I've made us some green tea with molasses and gooseberry jam and nuts. Now we'll have a feast." Oksana had been in the chef's room only briefly before, but now she could examine the room in more detail. The same elegance and home coziness, spiced with personal things dear to her heart. There were many framed photographs on the wall, Carl and his wife still very young, Elizabeth in various angles, Ashley in the garden, then near the gazebo, then by the pool, a handsome young man on horseback. "That's our Harry. A handsome man." Gabriella doesn't mince words. "God grant him personal happiness. He's like his father in business. He should have children of his own, and he's still traveling abroad. I realize he's no monk, but all these windy girlfriends aren't what he needs for marriage. He'll make a marvelous father. He loves Elizabeth." Vanessa ate another spoonful of clear amber and emerald gooseberry jam and began her tale. "After high school 35 years ago, I trained as a food technologist. Not just any culinary school in New York City. I dreamed of a career as a chef. The kind that would get me Michelin stars for the art of cooking. It didn't work out. The reason for everything was my uncluttered appearance. Height under 1 meter 90 centimeters, size 42 feet, fullness, bright copper hair, angular movements, lack of taste in the choice of wardrobe. Of course, chefs are not chosen by their clothes, but representatives of the personnel service and all the cafes and restaurants where I tried to get a job after graduation refused me under any plausible pretext. In one prestigious restaurant, only the lady in personnel was honest. Our customers often invite the chef of the dish to the room if they like it. You cannot be a business card of our institution. You're only fit for a place in the circus buffet. I don't say this harshly because I'm cynical, not at all. I like to be honest with the people I hire. It's better that way than looking away shamefacedly and keeping a kook in my pocket. And yet my traveling in agony was one day crowned with success. I was taken to a private cafe Tsarina Tamara with authentic Georgian cuisine. The owner is a small, bald Georgian with hooked fingers and crooked legs. He then temporarily dispelled even the myth for me that Caucasian men are always endowed with a sharp oriental beauty. Curly-haired, black-eyed, daring, this man said without a word of criticism. "I have a wife who is ill in a female way. She can't sleep with me. And I am a man. I need to save my physiology. You'll work in the kitchen and visit me a couple of times a week. If you do well, I'll make you head chef, and then maybe chief." I, from his words at first in a precipitate fell out, said that I would think about it, and then I calculated in the Institute 6 years at the correspondence department. Before that, 2 years as an assistant cook in the canteen. I am not today, so tomorrow 26 years old will be. And I'm still wearing girls. There's no cue for my red-headed soul. No one even looked at me with that enveloping male gaze full of desire. Ever. Blushing and pale, 2 days later informed that I agreed to all the terms. The owner of Tsarina Tamara glared at me, invited me to the back room. There I learnt the basics of love between crates of vegetables, herbs, and boxes of vodka, which in decanters was later passed off as cha-cha. It's a shame, come on. Big physiological love on a quick hand honestly lasted between me and the chief for a year and a half. And then I got pregnant. Having learnt the news, my lover was not ceremonious, dismissed in no time. He kept bemoaning that I shouldn't talk, that his wife shouldn't know anything. He has 3 grown-up children, they'll see who he's staring at. The family will laugh. He paid me 3 months' salary in advance and washed his paternal hands at me. About the fact that the baby should be born, I informed him not immediately. All the time delayed, I felt that this news will not turn out well. With my general fullness, belly became noticeable only in the 6th or 7th month, just before the usual official maternity leave. I found myself on the street. My rent ran out 2 weeks before Ashley was born. All I had was an aunt in a remote village. I can't even tell you how close we are. I'd never seen my father before. My mother drank herself to death when I was 20. She was homeless at first, and then she went missing. But I never doubted for a second that the baby would be. I'm alone in this world, and this will be my own blood. The landlady of my flat is not a kind-hearted person, but she took pity, waited until I gave birth and discharged from the maternity hospital. She gave me a month to do everything, and then she put up with it for free. And then her children came to live with her. They had nowhere to live. So she showed me the door. We went with a 1-month-old baby to grieve. We stayed a week in a shabby hotel, but my son was restless. The noise insulation in the building was shitty. Other guests began to complain that we did not let them sleep at night. We moved out to nowhere. I'm sitting at the intercity bus stop with my stuff and Ashley's bundle. I thought I'd go to the countryside, see if I could find an abandoned house. I had enough money in my purse for a week's existence. When an expensive dark Jeep pulled up next to the bus stop, I didn't even immediately realize that the driver was asking me what I had. I sat there in tears. Carl, and it was him. At that time, the house in these parts built a house, looking for a local specialized shop that recently erected on the highway. I gave him the address, why not, but he didn't leave at once. Later he told me that my eyes were like those of a beaten dog and there was so much desperation in them that he couldn't resist asking. "Woman, why are you sitting in the wind with a baby? I can give you a lift somewhere, even if it's in the other direction." I don't know how it happened, but I told him all my troubles in 2 words, as if I were in the wind. He chuckled and thought about it for a few minutes, then asked, "A professional cook, you say?" "I'm looking for such a specialist. I need to feed 2 teams of workers every day. We can provide you with a boxcar for accommodation." Of course, I didn't hesitate for a second. It was getting late, and the bus was delayed, so I was going to sleep in the field with Ashley, right on the dead grass. I gathered up my few belongings and climbed into the warmth of the car. There was no fear or apprehension. I was used to the work, and I loved my craft. Vanessa interrupted her long story and poured her and Amanda another cup of fragrant tea. She brought from the kitchen a dish of ruddy cakes left over from dinner and glanced briefly at Amanda. "Have I bored you with my tales yet, Doctor?" "Not at all, Vanessa. It's rare for anyone to talk to me so heartily, to confide their secrets to me. I am very grateful to you for this frankness." "Then I will continue," said the woman. Then everything was much more pleasant. Guy's workers met me as a mother starved on dry meat, and I with a move them borscht boiled on a brain bone, cooked cutlets, wheat porridge in a cast iron steamed with butter. When they brought to the table and compote, the foreman could not stand it. "You cook deliciously, Vanessa. We haven't seen such delicacies here for a long time. Therefore, guys, I will order the following. We have 15 people working here. It's hard to feed that many without a well-equipped kitchen. So we'll distribute the daily duty. Who of the men will help with wood for the stove? Who will carry water? Who will help the cook with other hard work? She's got a little boy in her arms. He needs to be fed and nursed. So have a conscience, brothers. Don't sit on this young woman's neck, and don't offend her in word or deed." That's how I found myself in our yard about 30 years ago when it was still under construction. Ashley is my native gold, having grown up here. After the construction was finished, I stayed in the house with the owners. Carl and his wife had Harry's little boy at the time. Oh, what a table I made for their housewarming party. The guests could only wonder where he'd found such a cook. There were various people in the house, high-ranking and with connections. Many times they tried to lure me to other houses. How could they do such a thing? An angel of goodness from heaven appeared to me one autumn evening at a bus stop, and I would betray him when others beckoned. Elizabeth was born to me, her nannies and carers, and Carl made me head of the house and promoted me to housekeeper. Everyone here has become dear to me. Even that empty Gabriella with her dreams of hunting Carl's son doesn't seem like an enemy. That's my story for you, Amanda. Maybe it will help you in your work. Amanda went to her room pensive. She used to trust the notion that the rich were stingy with their souls. In Carl's house, she saw a different world full of warmth, respect, and a willingness to help each other through the difficult realities of life. Her fervent conviction to do everything she could to make Elizabeth feel at least a little better became even stronger in her mind. From the next day, she increased the therapeutic load for the girl, insisted on the return of massage procedures, deciding that they were not harmful to the body, broken by the disease, and on the contrary, contribute to its tone. Elizabeth was still unresponsive to the change in regime. Only the appearance of Timothy's shaggy puppy seemed to revitalize her face a little. Amanda didn't give up. She wheeled her pram around the park and sat Elizabeth down to watch Ashley's dog. He took the assignment seriously. Little Tim already knew the commands sit, down, place, come, walk. In the house, the Newfoundland recognized only two masters: Elizabeth, at whose feet he spent all his free time, and Ashley, who fed and brought him up. The days were running by, and the winter holidays, New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone's favorite, were approaching. Amanda, Gabby, and Vanessa were happy to decorate the already pretty house with fir tree arrangements, colorful wreaths, and sculptures of fairy tale characters. Ashley installed artificial Christmas trees in all the rooms, richly decorated with expensive toys. Everyone was in a pre-holiday mood. 3 days before New Year's Eve, Amanda received an unexpected phone call from her only close friend. "Amanda, you're going to fall over. I have big news. I'm getting hastily married and moving to Florida with my lover. He's a military engineer. We're going to live near the Cape Canaveral spaceport." Amanda was instantly sad. With Olivia, they were like sisters almost, since the orphanage together, always supported each other, and now they were going to be separated. Meanwhile, her friend continued to chatter into the phone. "On the 30th of December, I have a farewell bachelorette party in a nightclub. On the 2nd of January, we have a one-way flight. No cancellations. Amanda, I've prepared a present for you for the road. I've made an evening dress. It's amazing. It's not worthy of your beauty, but it'll set it off beautifully." If Olivia could see me now, she would die laughing, thought the nurse. Recently, she had overheard Gaby's remarks about her. The maid gave her a scornful look after dinner and summarized. "Our therapist is a moth-pale mouse gray. How only the earth bears such shapeless, faceless women. They're worthless, and men probably avoid such a scarecrow a mile away." Amanda promised Olivia to call back by nightfall and went to Elizabeth's room. The girl, after a hearty dinner, a walk before, was already fast asleep, sprawled out on the soft pillows. After adjusting the blanket, she slipped out into the corridor. The conversation with Carl was not going to be easy. At her timid knock on the door of the study, the owner responded at once. "Come in. I've just finished going through the evening's papers. Is something the matter?" "I had an emergency." She outlined the situation in a nutshell, but I'll accept whatever you decide. "The fact is, someone close to me is going away for a long time. We won't get a chance to see each other if I can't make it to my friend's appointment. I'm not a warden in prison or a cousin in the zone to keep you locked up, Amanda. You've been in our house for a month and a half without leave. Elizabeth is doing well, if not brilliantly, without a hint of deterioration. I am pleased with your initiatives, methods, and practical experiments. None of them have been detrimental to my sick daughter. Be sure to go to the city. I'll give you 24 hours. On the 31st of December, after 8 p.m., you must return to these walls." Amanda didn't leave his office. She flew out on wings. Vanessa was in the kitchen, and the released nurse couldn't help but share her news with her. "I'm ugly," Amanda said, "but everyone wants a bit of colorful holiday. And when I get to see my Olivia again." "You're ugly?" She smiled back at the cook. "Save the fairy tales for others, my dear. All your masquerades won't fool me, a clever old lady who has lived in this world. I guessed long ago that you hide your beauty under a dull image, wearing glasses. Don't you worry, this secret stays between us. If you're doing this, you must have a good reason. All this cross-dressing doesn't interfere with your profession, but it's my business." Amanda turned round at a run, rushed back into the kitchen, and hugged the cookery master warmly and tenderly. "I know two angels of kindness in this house already. Vanessa, your kindness and willingness to understand and accept is in no way inferior to your host's graciousness." She gave Vanessa an embarrassed peck on her lush cheek, smelling of vanilla and apples, and rushed off to call Olivia to cheer her up with the news. Considering that Olivia worked as a fashion designer in one of the city's eyeliers, Amanda's dress had turned out to be luxurious. Soft, tight silk of dark blue color emphasized every curve of the graceful figure, while not forgetting all the proper charms and roundness, the neckline, and the slit on the leg to the very point and measure. A string of pearls, a bracelet and earrings that her adoptive parents gave her on her 25th birthday, exactly in tone and in the general style of the outfit. As she dressed her friend in one of the changing booths in the attire, Olivia froze with admiration. "Amanda, you are going to be a goddess this evening. And your fiancé, I'm sure he won't waver. He's already seen you in our shared photos. But the rest of the male sex will be at your feet, you'll see." "Oh, I'd rather stay away from all these signs of intrusive male attention." Amanda replied bitterly. "I've had enough sad experiences in this area. It seems to me that decent, if not knights, at least adequate gentlemen are no longer in this world. I have only come across representatives who managed to disappoint me for a long time. I'm going home to my flat to fix my hair and nails and stuff. I'll meet you at the club tonight." The place called Big City Lights met Amanda, who arrived by taxi with a stunningly colorful appearance. Dressed up fir trees and pine trees, colored lights and tinsel shining in their light, the crowd dressed to the hilt. Her favorite friend Olivia was wrong. There were many real beauties on the dance floor, at the tables, at the bar, worthy to become the prima donnas of this evening and the coming night. On the eve of the new year, it seemed that everyone tried not to hit in the dirt face. The audience was already relaxed by the fountain of hot drinks. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief. No one around her cared about her, but she was glad too soon. At one of the tables, Mason was having a good time with his friends, her first and only man. At the sight of Amanda relaxed and chatting serenely with Olivia and the rest of the girls, a greedy gleam lit up in the man's eyes. And that girl just got even more beautiful. I shouldn't have let that bird out of the love cage back then. Such a friend next to me will make the image of any successful man, he thought to himself, lewdly grinning. Today again, I will get her into bed. Deciding to give his victim at least one drink to make her more agreeable, Mason returned to his company, but kept Amanda in his sights. After about an hour, Mason ran out of patience. He decided to go and teach the wayward babe a lesson by humiliating her in front of her friends. Amanda suddenly appeared behind him with a banal greeting. "I see what people are like without a bodyguard. Do you want me to protect your gorgeous body from the claims of other men?" Amanda jerked away from Mason in surprise, but she didn't want to spoil Olivia's wonderful evening, so she quickly got up from the table and led Mason away from the bar. "What do you want? You and I dotted all the I's and T's a long time ago. Go back to whoever you're spending the night with, and leave me alone." But it wasn't so easy to stop the smarmy bastard. He wasn't about to give up his intentions to sleep with such a lovely woman again. "Come on, Amanda. Let's have a nice glass of red wine to this chance encounter and part as friends. I didn't mean to piss you off. I just thought you might have something to remember from the pages of our brief affair." The woman prudently decided not to make a scandal because of casual circumstances and obediently followed the man. At the counter, Mason ordered 2 glasses of some expensive grape wine and from an overseas collection, generously bought a chocolate bar and nuts sprinkled with sugar. He put his arm round Amanda's waist. The man's calculation was trivial, that now his old acquaintance would get drunk and become more docile, but he was wrong. Amanda drained her wine glass without even tasting it, and looked boldly into her ex-lover's eyes. "Am I free of you now? Is the ritual honored?" Mason was not accustomed to such behavior of ladies. He had never been refused, so he began to whisper in her ear. "This is not the end of our New Year's Eve date, my dear. Don't get your hopes up. I'm going to rent a private office and you're going to be gentle with me. I remember everything, my lovely." Here we go again, Amanda thought with annoyance. Why is it that when a man is around, all his desires are always reduced to one thing? She looked around helplessly. There was no one around except a young man calmly sipping whiskey at the counter. Their eyes met, and what did the stranger read? But he slid valiantly off the bar stool and approached them. "This woman is here with me. I only stepped away from the table for a short while, and you young man immediately took advantage of my absence." Mason's eyes widened in surprise. "What kind of businessman are you? Where did you come from?" Amanda remembered the rest of it as if in a nightmare. The man who had come to her rescue had lifted Mason off the floor like a feather and given him a solid slap on the wrist. But the bitchy, temper tantrum-hardened man didn't calm down. Before retreating from the battlefield, he grabbed his unfinished glass of red wine and splashed the brightly colored liquid directly onto Amanda's dress. A huge maroon stain instantly spread across the silk. The woman turned pale, and her unexpected knight grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the bathroom. On the way, he said something about washing the cloth quickly, then there would be no trace left. Amanda was worried about something else entirely. No one had ever stood up for her before in her life. Suddenly, on some impulse, she threw her arms around the man's neck and dragged him with her to the club's exit, stopping only for a moment at the cloakroom to retrieve his coat. "I've got a car. I have an appointment here with an old friend, but he's running late." But Amanda didn't listen to him. As in a dream, she dragged the newly disembarked passengers along the cold autumn street to the car with checkers. She didn't care about propriety, about her ruined outfit, about the surprise of her companion who followed her obediently. There was only one single thought in her head. "How good it is that I like to wear expensive silk linen. It won't be embarrassing." In her flat, where she had brought a random knight from the club, she pounced on the man like a tigress, like a ravenous March cat, and he didn't fight back. Everything that happened between them was like being in the Garden of Eden. The body sang, the soul rejoiced, the thoughts danced the can-can. How tired I am of being well-mannered and decent. Let it all be a one-time thing. I don't even know his name, though my casual lover is obviously handsome and not stupid. Of the latter, she was somehow sure, though they hadn't said a word to each other. In the morning, they fell asleep together without breaking their embrace, but Amanda woke up alone. Apart from the crumpled bed and a pillow that still smelled of a man's perfume, there was nothing in her flat that reminded her of the night before. She brewed coffee, pulled out her shoebox stash to buy Christmas presents for everyone in Carl's house. She was beginning to think of all these people as family. And the night, what could she do about it, that it had come to an end? All New Year's Eve magic comes to an end at some point. Gone was Father Christmas, having rid her of the vile Mason. It's just a pity she didn't even feed the stranger breakfast, really. The fridge is empty, and there's no bread, not even a slice. But she can make delicious pancakes. Okay, flour, sugar, vanilla, milk. There's a block of frozen butter in the freezer. But dream away. She needs to get back to her chores. Amanda went back to her fancy dress of a simpleton fool, packed her bag and rang Andrew. Carl's driver had promised to take her shopping for presents and get her back to the manor by the appointed time. Amanda suddenly thought that the man she had spent this magical night with was also an angel of goodness and protection, at least for her personally. Her mood was twofold: sadness at the separation and something unfulfilled, and joy that such fireworks had happened in her rather bland life. At Carl's house, she and Andrew were there at 8 p.m. sharp, like clockwork. On the doorstep, Amanda was held up by Ashley and Tim. The gardener, embarrassed, handed her a bouquet made of spruce paws with pine cones and boughs of glittery sprinkles. Gabriella appeared on the porch, painted today, apparently in honor of New Year's Eve, in all the colors of the rainbow. Colored mascara, eyeliner, shadow, blush, lipstick. Strangely, with the maid's naturally good looks, it didn't even spoil her. "Why, Ashley, you've been flaunting your attentions all over the place, and you said you loved me to the grave. Are your feelings," she misspelled the word, "faded already? Have you switched to our doctor?" The modest, quiet, ordinary gardener suddenly decided to fight back. "I haven't had time to give you my simple gift yet, but don't touch Amanda. Don't you dare even speak to her in a disrespectful manner. You're not worth a fingernail." Gabriella gave Ashley a scornful glance and sang back, "Shut up already, you gardening scarecrow. You're not the one I'm waiting here for. Harry should be here soon. The man's no match for you. Learn from him what a man with a capital letter looks and acts like." Amanda took Ashley's arm and led her away from him to interrupt the unpleasant monologue. You don't listen to her filthy words, Ashley. A man who can love plants and animals so well, it's like he's an extension of them on this earth. Some of us become an angel of kindness to others, heals and saves lost, unhappy souls. And someone becomes a kind of shepherd, guide, conductor for flora and fauna, protects it from human cruelty, uses people for good, not spoiling, sparing, wisely. You are one of such angels of goodness for Mother Nature. Be proud of such an exceptional status. You have earned it. Amanda pecked the confused Ashley on the cheek and walked up the stairs. In the distance, she heard the sound of a car approaching the house, but she was already running to her ward. It was New Year's Eve, and Elizabeth wasn't ready. Vanessa had her hands full with the table. Everything was sparkling and glittering in the decorated hall. The table was bursting with food and drink, and all the family was dressed up. Even Amanda had changed her shapeless jumper for a white blouse with lace and a black skirt. The only things left in place were the wispy curl on her head and the funny glasses on the bridge of her nose. Carl came to the table in a soft cashmere pullover and loose light-colored trousers. Vanessa had little gold tinsel bows on her head and in her apron. Gabriella wore a provocative purple dress with a low neckline and a deep cutout on the back. It was the way the dishes were served to the table. In her chair sat a rather plain Elizabeth, wearing a delicate violet-colored dress. Amanda had done her hair. The girl looked refreshed. At her feet, as usual, lay the faithful guard Timothy. Ashley had specially washed him with dog shampoo for the holiday. His coat was shiny and even silvery in places. Amanda had already handed out presents to everyone, little Christmas decorations depicting angels in various outfits. All of them, if you shook them a little, made a melodious chime. We started to sit down at the table at 22 in the evening. We had to see off the old year, thank it for all the good things, and ask it to take the bad things with it. Carl went out to hurry his son, and soon they were in the hall together. Amanda was just taking a sip of orange juice when the man she had spent tonight with appeared in front of Elizabeth and her. She even caught the end of the sentence. "I'm sorry, Father, I was late. There were unforeseen circumstances. And then I also had to reschedule an important business meeting that had canceled yesterday." Amanda choked up and blinked her eyes, frightened. And then a miracle happened in front of everyone. There was no other word for it. Elizabeth became animated, reached out to her brother, and then made a gesture towards the floor and inarticulately said, "Naïf." Everyone was stunned and rushed to brace and hug the girl. Amanda slipped quietly from the table in the midst of the commotion. Let her relatives stay together. Without her, no one would notice her absence, and she needed to recover from the unexpected shock of discovery. The man of her dreams, her mysterious night visitor, and Carl's son were one and the same person. She was shaking all over with confusion. At the table, it was soon discovered that Elizabeth's carer and her doctor, who had brought such a joyous event to the house, had gone somewhere. Harry was sent in search of her, and he knocked insistently on the door of the house physician, then opened it a little, but found nothing in the room but the sound of water running in the bath. Deciding that the woman might have been taken ill, the man pushed the bathroom door resolutely open. Above the bathtub, bent over, Amanda was furiously rubbing some kind of cloth, dropping tears into the water. She turned round at the noise of the door opening. She wasn't wearing her ugly glasses now. Her hair was loose down her back, and Harry caught a glimpse of something very familiar about her. Then he moved his eyes to the bathtub where a beautiful dark blue silk dress lay. The puzzle came together. You? Harry shrieked in surprise, and I came back with champagne, provisions, a bouquet of flowers to your flat, but it was empty. I almost went mad with despair. I thought I'd lost my night fairy forever. Amanda boldly stepped into his open arms. To hell with all principles, decency, rules. This man had turned her soul upside down yesterday. People on this earth meet and get to know each other in different ways. She feels good with him. The rest doesn't matter. Harry let the girl out first. Quickly put something on. It's only 5 minutes until the chimes strike. We'll make it in time. There was no time for the usual masquerade. Amanda's blouse and skirt were all wet. She pulled on her tight jeans and white jumper in a matter of seconds. Didn't bother to brush her hair. They arrived at the table as the chime struck. Champagne bubbles were playing in the glasses. Vanessa's culinary creations were waiting on the table. Even Elizabeth tried to put a semblance of a smile on her face. Carl did not ask his son a single question, only glanced at the young people seated at the table next to him. Vanessa thought to herself, and with that, we'll soon have children's voices in our house again. Ashley smiled happily, stroking Tim's back. Gabriella was biting her lip nervously and chewing on a red fish sandwich. So I'll have Ashley stolen from me soon enough if I'm catching crows. Now I'll have to accept the gardener's advances if I'm to stay in this house and get more of a foothold. He's not a bad chap, he's kind and handy, and quite handsome. The New Year's Eve night was truly fairy tale and magical, just as it should have been. Everyone at the table was happy in his own way. The long-awaited winter holidays flew by in the midst of entertainment and rest. Only Amanda worked tirelessly with Elizabeth to consolidate her success. On his first day at work, Carl realized that he had relaxed too much over the weekend and decided to be home early. Quietly stepping on the soft carpeted walkway, he walked to the door of his daughter's room and witnessed Elizabeth's new victories. Nuff, Tima, Daddy, Harry, Vanessa, Ashley, Amanda. Gaby Elizabeth dutifully repeated the syllables after Amanda. Carl rounded the corner of the corridor and cried. A panel appointed by Amanda's teacher 10 days later gave a reassuring summary the disease had subsided. The process of cell and tissue destruction had slowed down. The remission period had already exceeded all known scientific limits. Carl, I told you Amanda is an excellent specialist. In our case, expecting a full recovery is a bit of a stretch. But your daughter has shown marked improvement in her general condition. She's starting to react to the outside world. Weakly, not much, but she's starting to talk again. You know, I was thinking, if the patient lives surrounded by angels of goodness, as my student characterized it to me, he has every chance to stay on this earth for some more time, and you will make him as happy as possible for her. I am sure of it. 6 months have passed. The plane leaving on the morning flight to Prague was delayed due to weather conditions. The cute young couple kept glancing at the electronic board and at each other. Harry, what if I hadn't gone to that ill-fated nightclub then? You would have seen me in the image of a monster and would not pay attention to me, asked the mum-to-be, with a rather noticeable rounded tummy. Come on. The man answered her, adjusting his wedding ring on his finger. I would have seen you through all your disguises. Your angelic soul, your ability to do good cannot be hidden. I'd fall for such radiant magic. The iron, monotonous voice of the announcer announced the boarding of their flight. The couple hugged each other and slowly walked towards the boarding point. We will finish all my business in Prague now. You will see this beautiful city, and we will hurry to our home. Elizabeth, do you know what she gave me before we left? Harry, Amanda, Elizabeth, Tim is waiting. It's a puzzle. We can't let them all down. Without us, the circle of good angels would be incomplete.